Hello everybody, my name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, idiot, and loin trimmer, and today we're going to be talking about The Devil in the Dark Water by Stuart Turton. If you looked at the title of this video, nobody is more disappointed than I am about this. I was looking forward to this book since we started reading 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle last year, and I was like, oh, I'm digging this. And we got to the end of that, and I was like, oh, I can't wait to read more Stuart Turton. And then I read this, and I was like, when is it going to end? It felt so long. Oh my gosh. Well, we're going to get into all of the nitty gritties of this book, talk about it. I need to talk about it. This is also a book that I felt like I was being gaslit as I read it, because I was like, no way, no way. And I had to, am I just too dumb to read? Am I really just, this has to be a me problem. This has to be a me comprehension problem. And maybe it is, but you know, even if I'm so much an idiot that I can't read, that did not make this any more enjoyable. It doesn't change the experience I had. So we're going to talk about that. If you've read this book, I would love to hear from you what your thoughts were, because I need to exercise everything that I experienced with this, and I need some other people who have read this or to talk about this book with. So we're going to do that. However, before we get started, number one, if you enjoy what I do here on the channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Number two, if you would like to be featured on the channel, check out the links down in the description below. The number one way to be featured is through Lemwy, the monthly prompt writing contest, where I give you a prompt. You write a short story using that prompt, and on the first Monday video of the month, we bask in your creativity like we did on Monday. The second way to be featured is if you are an indie author and you have a book out or a book that is coming out. If you submit to the Fresh Meat feature, your page, or if you submit to the Fresh Meat feature, your first chapter and your cover, that chapter will be read here on the channel to hopefully help more readers find your work. I could be a reader. I very well may not be a reader. But you know, you could still cast your lot. What's the harm, really? And the third way to be featured is that during the summer, I am planning to do viewer submitted books. And so it could be your book. It could be a book that you're interested in seeing what I will do. But there is a link in the description below. It is on the link tree. If you would like to submit a book to me for my consideration, those will likely be picked at random for the most part, probably. And anytime I'm looking for something other than what's on my immediate to read list. So if you would like to submit your book there, just prepare yourself knowing what I do on this channel, how I read books, how I talk about books. I like you get yourself ready for the best case scenario and the worst case scenario, because here we just talk. The third thing is, if you would like to check out any of my books, give me a chance. They're available at any of your favorite good books, including the local library upon request. My newest novel, Body More Zero, came out in October, and my forthcoming novel, which is a collaborative effort with Immeasurable, will hopefully be slated for November, and it is the first Legend of Bill Cassidy series. Look forward to it. It is a Western. And with that said, let's jump into the topic. So last year on the Loin, which is the book club here on the channel, we read the 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, and I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the way that author perspectives. I enjoyed the way that he told the story, and I enjoy the way that they closed out the story, because it was hopeful. Like there were still some issues with the ending, but for the most part, I just like enjoyed it, and I was just going along for the ride. And I was like, okay, cool. I am ready to see more of what this person's creativity is like, the stories that this person is like, the stories that this person tells, and what they are like. You really get a good sense of what authors are like when you start reading more of their work. So what I really find interesting, and I'm really glad for the people that stick around for like all of the Lauren Chambers books, and that we're reading multiple Lauren Chambers books, is that we get to see what that author's perspective looks like across books and kind of how they craft stories. And so like when you read multiple books from one author, you kind of start getting a sense of how they craft stories in more ways than one. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing, but you at least get a sense, and that's kind of the thing that'll draw people back to reading you again and again and again, even if you don't like a certain book that an author comes out with, or two books, but you're going to keep giving them chances because you like the way that they write and you want to see the world that they create. That is a reason why, even if you don't like a book, you might read it more from an author. And like I got more perspective from C.L. Carhart when I read multiple books about his name was Augustine books. I got more sense of George Saunders when I read multiple George Saunders books, and I got a good sense of Bret Easton Ellis when I read Bret Easton Ellis's books, and the same with Chuck Palahniuk. And so it's the thing. You kind of just get a sense of how somebody creates when you read multiple multiple stories. I was looking forward to this, to seeing what Stuart Turton would do, and my disappointment is immeasurable. My week was ruined, in fact. Major parts of this book also include people cheating on people. That is a major aspect of the story. I found it hard to care about anyone or be invested in any of these characters for multiple reasons. And when it's a thriller mystery, when you don't care about the outcome of anything. Oh, and then the ending. Oh my gosh. I went from disappointed to annoyed to angry. As much as angry, like, anger is kind of a too strong of a descriptor for this because it didn't really affect me that much, but I'm like, I cannot believe you wasted my time like this. So let's talk about it, because I need to talk about it. I need to talk about these characters and what the story decided to do. Starting off, we're going to go with the whole of the prologue to kind of give you a brief, it's just like 2 paragraphs, so that's fine. It'll be kind of a setup to give you the setting, because good luck getting any setting anywhere else in this book. Quote, in 1634, the United East India Company was the wealthiest trading company in existence, with outposts spread across Asia and the Cape. The most profitable of these was Batavia, which shipped mace, pepper, spices, and silks back to Amsterdam aboard its fleet of Indiaman galleons. The journey took 8 months and was fraught with danger. Oceans were largely unmapped and navigational aids were rudimentary. Only one certain route existed between Batavia and Amsterdam, and ships that strayed beyond it were often lost. Even those that kept between these wagon lines remained at the mercy of disease, storms, and pirates. Many who boarded in Batavia would never make it to Amsterdam. Oh, something that I want to put on this really quickly before we get started, because I'm going to forget otherwise, is there is a note at the end of this book that is from the author talking about this isn't a story about boats or about and it's not a historical book, and it's not something else. And it's basically a note excusing the author's creative choices or excusing like inaccuracies in clothing or in customs or in anything. And for me, that reads too much like the author was probably paying too much attention to audience and considering audience responses too much, because he's like, don't send me hate mail. Please don't send me hate mail. Look, I already know my stuff is inaccurate. Don't send me mail about it. Which tells me the author was probably thinking of this. It's kind of like if I put a message at the end of Dead and Dry that said, hey guys, I know that there might be some jokes in here, some references in here. You know, some of the characters are kind of dicks. I mean, they're all murderers, but like, I'm not a racist. I'm not a whatever. Don't come at me. It's just kind of sad. And I think a lot of people, especially because of the parasocial and the quick connection of like social media to creators, makes many much more cognizant of audience and feel like they're much more beholden to audience responses, or they need to take into consideration audience responses while they're still crafting the story. And it kind of scares people off from exploring their creative works, because blowback, as opposed to if you have that separation where you're not necessarily thinking about them as much. And it even kind of goes to a video I did a couple months ago actually, where it was like impact versus intent. And I think too many people might be thinking of impact or thinking that they gotta apologize for stuff that hasn't happened yet. But let me know what you think on that. I do think that a lot of people are preoccupied, and I've heard it in more than one occasion of, well, I want to do this, but I'm afraid of like what people are going to say when I do this, or, oh my goodness, the mob is going to come after me when I publish this. And I've known so many people who have talked about like the response to their work, the theoretical angry response to their work when it's nowhere even near publishing time. And so it's like, those people aren't even your audience. It really doesn't matter. Changing your work wouldn't change their response anyway. That's just how I feel. I kind of try to distance myself from whatever the response is and write my stories as honestly as I possibly can for who the characters are supposed to be and what the story is. And then when people like it or don't like it, it is what it is. I'm not going to be able to please everybody, but I can be happy that my story is as honest with the characters as can be, even if the characters are kind of ugly or very ugly. I still think it's funny that people have a higher tolerance for murderers than racism, though. Anyway, continuing on. When we get to chapter 1, we enter with Errant Hayes, who is one of our main characters, one of our main viewpoint characters. He is going to be one of our entry points. We have 2 main entry points for this story, though there is a huge cast of characters, but Errant Hayes is going to be one of our main characters that we are following, and he is a lieutenant loading on a ship besides a prisoner named Sammy Pipps. He is actually the bodyguard of Sammy Pipps and theoretically kind of a friend of Sammy Pipps, though if you can call it friendship when you are hired, that is a question. Quote, Errant Hayes howled in pain as a rock slammed into his massive back. Another whistled by his ear, a third striking his knee, causing him to stumble, bringing jeers from a pitiless mob, who were already searching the ground for more missiles to throw. Hundreds of them were being held back by the city watch, their spittle-flecked lips shouting insults, their eyes black with malice. Take shelter, for pity's sake, implored Sammy Pips over the din, his manacles flashing in the sunlight as he staggered across the dusty ground. It's me they want. Errant, twice the height and half again the width of most men in Batavia, including Pip. Although not a prisoner himself, he'd placed his large body between the crowd and his much smaller friend, offering them only a sliver of target to aim at. The Bear and the Sparrow, they'd been nicknamed before Sammy's fall. Never before had it appeared so true. Pips was being taken from the dungeons to the harbor, where a ship waited to transport him to Amsterdam. 4 musketeers were escorting them, but they were keeping their distance, wary of becoming targets themselves. You pay me to protect you, snarled Errant, wiping the dusty sweat from his eyes as he tried to gauge their safety. I'll do it until I can't anymore. The harbor lay behind the huge set of gates at the far end of Batavia's central boulevard. Once those gates closed behind them, they were beyond the crowd's reach. Unfortunately, they were at the tail end of the long procession, moving slowly in the heat. The gates seemed no closer now than when they'd left the humid dampness of the dungeon at midday. A rock thudded into the ground at Errant's feet, spraying his boots with dried dirt. Another ricocheted off Sammy's chains. Traders were selling them out of sacks and making good coin doing it. Damn Batavia, snarled Errant. Bastards can't abide an empty pocket. On a normal day, these people would be buying from the bakers, tailors, cordwainers, binders, and candle makers lining the boulevard. They'd be smiling and laughing, grumbling about the infernal heat, but manacle a man, offer him up a torment, and even the meekest soul surrender itself to the devil. It's my blood they want, argued Sammy, trying to push Errant away. Get yourself to safety, I'm begging you. So one of the things that we're going to find with Errant is he's supposed to be like a really good guy, and that is the thing that makes him separate. Like even Sammy's going to be like, wow, I befriended you because I was hoping to use you, but you are not actually a terrible person like everybody else. Ship. We'll get there. But he does that. However, with this, you don't really see Errant being introduced as kind of this guy that's like, look, I will protect you. He is like, I will protect you, but he's already swearing at all of these townspeople, and he doesn't have any grace for any of these townspeople and is judging these townspeople, which is also something that we will see throughout the story. I have a comment for that too, where it feels like Errant is constantly being used to like finger wag at other people and be like holier than thou than other people, but he's supposed to be like the goodiest good boy that ever good boyed. And so it's kind of obnoxious to me. They're being led to the boat by Governor General John Hahn, whom I'm going to call throughout this Governor Uncle, because there's so many characters that when I was reading this, I was trying to remember that not only that he was a governor by position, but he is Arrant's uncle. So I was trying to remember connections that people had and ended up just referring to Governor General John Hahn as Governor Uncle. So if you hear me refer to Governor Uncle in the synopsis as we go, that is why. Quote, the procession was being led by Governor General John Hahn, who was stiff-backed on a white stallion, a breastplate fastened above his doublet, a sword clattering at his waist. 13 years ago, he'd purchased the village that had stood here on behalf of the United East India Company. No sooner had the natives signed the contract than he'd put a torch to it, using its ashes to blot out the roads, canals, and buildings of the city that would take its place. People seemed to like him nonetheless, which is also weird considering everybody's like, he is maniacal and he has killed so many people. If he has lived in Batavia for this long and has murdered so many people, it should be people are afraid of him because he has killed a bunch of innocent women, children, and men, and destroyed villages, destroyed families. But I'm not entirely sure if it's in the Batavia region or like if he purchased this 13 years ago, like I'm kind of lived in this area, but we don't really get that background. Anyway, you would think that he would have some kind of record for his cruelty because everybody knows his cruelty and he beats his wife in front of everybody, but everybody is like, oh, hey, we're clapping for Governor Uncle as he walks by. As they board the ship, a man covered in blood bloody bandages, exclaimed as a leper appears on top of a box and says, quote, "Know that my master," his roaming gaze snagged on Arendt, causing the mercenary's heart to jolt, "sails aboard the Sardam. He is the lord of hidden things, all desperate and dark things. He offers this warning in accordance with the old laws. The Sardam's cargo is sin, and all who board her will be brought to merciless ruin. She will not reach Amsterdam." As the last word was uttered, the hem of his robe burst into flames. Children wailed. The watching crowd gasped and screamed in horror. The leper didn't make a sound. The fire crawled up his body until he was completely aflame. He didn't move. He burnt silently, his eyes affixed on Arendt. Yeah, that's definitely not a foreboding way to start a trip. Imagine getting on a plane and then somebody just they're like, "Now boarding," blah blah blah, and then somebody comes into the gate and is just shouting how you're all gonna die if you board that plane. Yeah, no worries here. The leper, though he is on fire, is still alive and didn't seem to set himself on fire as he tries to put himself out. A healer named Sarah Wessel, who is also Governor Uncle's wife, comes forward and gives the man some sort of painkillers to help ease him, but she addresses Arendt, saying that the only way to help him truly would be to put him out of his misery. He is in so much pain. He is a leper. He's on fire. He's got no hope in the future, so please just end him. Arendt takes a blade from a nearby guard and kills the leper. Sarah insists that the leper be treated with some dignity in death and given a proper burial, as she orders the town to do. She provides money for it and says that there will be punishment if he is not cared for appropriately. Sammy Pips warns Sarah that they should wait to set sail until the ship is looked over and that they look into the leper's warnings, and the leper showed signs that he was not working alone, but doing the impossible and was likely a carpenter on the ship. They need to look into it. Sarah says that her husband will not listen to someone like him, and the leper was a madman, surprised that anyone was taking him seriously. Another thing pointed out is that the man spoke without a tongue, but still Sarah says that her husband will not see Sammy Pip and will not listen to him, but she still begs. So this kind of, I have a question. Two things. Number one, Sammy Pip is the one who kind of is setting this up. So he's like, this is a spoiler for like the entire thing, okay? Sammy Pip is the one behind what's about to transpire on the ship. So why would he be warning them, hey, I mean, you can misdirect, whatever, but it doesn't seem appropriate that Sammy would be the one saying, hey, we shouldn't get on the ship. It seems kind of mysterious. At least he should be saying that to Arendt to see if Arendt would go over to them and suggest that they wait and check over the ship, because Arendt is also a lieutenant who is also related to the governor. So then if Sammy was like, hey, do you think that we should worry about that? Because that seemed kind of sketchy. Then Arendt could be like, that's a good point. And so then Arendt could go over and be like, hey, Sarah, do you think you could talk to your husband about us like waiting back and doing over the ship? And then Sarah does. And then, Governor Uncle is like, shut up. I'm not listening to a woman. This is dumb. Stop being superstitious. You're just hysterical. And then they could move on. Like that would have been better than being like, Sammy being like, but I think it's a red herring, and it's once you get to the end and you know that Sammy is behind us, it doesn't really make sense. Quote, please, my lady, you must convince your husband to delay the fleet's departure while Arendt investigates this matter. Arendt started at that. The last time he'd investigated a case had been 3 years ago. Nowadays, he'd kept out of that side of things. His job was to keep Sammy safe and trample underfoot whatever bastard he pointed his finger at. Questions are swords and answers are shield, persisted Sammy, still staring at Sarah. I'm begging you, armor yourself. Once the Sardam sets sail, it'll be too late. I don't know what his plan would have been if they waited. His plan is to kill them on the ship, so it's like... Also, another thing you're going to learn about Arendt is that he's pretty much dumb. He has like zero confidence, but he's like 6'7" and muscular, so he like fights everybody, but he has zero confidence towards like doing anything cerebral. Now, this is when I still had some level of hope, because the story starts off fairly quickly, fairly lots going on, and in these first 2 chapters we've got intrigue of not only the leper's warning, but we also have this introduction of this relationship that's complicated at least. The lieutenant, who is protective and friendly with the prisoner, we have no idea of their relationship yet, though we should have known that Arendt was hired by him at this point. It should have shared that. The prisoner, who knows the governor and his wife and also seems to be very educated and almost seems like he fell from the position of trust or power or authority. And there is also the setting that values life, even when putting an end to the leper, and Sarah having her daughter watch the killing to understand both the way of the world and what mercy looks like. None of this is spoken in exposition, but provided in how they speak to one another, which is also providing the momentum as the story moves and the stakes are hinted at. There is also the supernatural/eerie aspect of how the leper caught on fire and did what he did despite his physical limitation. While Arendt is looking over the body, Sarah the governor, and Chamberlain Cornelius Voss are talking about what to do with this thing called the folly. Now, we're never really going to hear what the folly is, other than it is this invention that is incredibly valuable, that will make people super, super rich, and that it was made by the 8 or 9-year-old Leah, but there is no point to it existing. Anyway, aside from them bringing the prisoner that is Sammy Pip on board, they also are carrying this very valuable box, and in that, they're not only concerned about people getting into it, but that the carriers have been concerned about dropping it or bringing undue attention to it from the crowd, as damage to it would get them in trouble. It's mentioned the best way to hide the folly might be to pretend it's in furniture. We also learned that they can take the folly apart into 3 separate pieces, and they do. So like, why it was carried in this one huge box and they're worried about the one huge box when they're just like, make it multiple things. That's just a way of bragging about the folly being in existence, because you need to know that it's there and how brilliant Leah is, even though it's got no pertinence on anything in the story. They do eventually figure what to do with the folly during the temporary travel. Attention brought back to the governor and his wife, we get this description, quote, under flat eyebrows, 2 dark eyes weighed her, as fingers scratched a long nose. By any measure, he was an ugly man, but unlike Chamberlain Voss, he radiated power. Every word out of his mouth felt like it was being etched into history. Every glance contained a subtle rebuke, an invitation for others to measure themselves against him and to discover the ways in which they were wanting. By merely living, he thought himself an instructional manual in good breeding, discipline, and value. My wife, said in a tone that could easily be mistaken for pleasant. His hand jerked to her face, causing her to flinch. Pressing a thumb to her cheek, he roughly wiped away a clot of powder. How unkind the heat is to you. She swallowed the insult, lowering her gaze. 15 years they'd been married, and she could count on one hand the number of times that she'd been able to hold his stare. It was those ink blot eyes. They were identical to Leah's, except for their daughters glittering with life. Her husband's were empty, like 2 dark holes his soul had long run out of. So you would think, hey, the devil, the dark water, his eyes are devilish and like dark water. It's really just being heavy-handed, because there is like no variation to Governor Uncle's character. He's just a bad person, and he will always be a bad person, and it leans into how much of a bad person he is at every chance that it has. She adds that she didn't marry him by choice. It was an arranged marriage that she was groomed for. Quote, in short, she'd have a beautiful cage and all of the time in the world to admire herself in the bars. Sarah had wept all the way home, begging her father not to send her away. It hadn't made any difference. The dowry was too large. Unbeknown to her, she'd been bred for sale and fattened like a calf with manners and an education. She'd felt betrayed, but she'd been young. She understood the world better now. Meat didn't get a say in whose hook it hung from. And her husband, Governor Uncle, didn't like how she acted with the leper, saying that it was unbecoming of her, impulsive and reckless, and she knows by the way that he's talking that she will be punished later when the 2 of them are alone. Because again, every time it is like Sarah in the same area or thinking about her husband, it is reminding you that he is a terrible person. In case you just forgot, he's a terrible person. In case you forgot, she hates him. In case you forgot, he beats her. And it's just like, Sarah's entire characterization is being a victim. Like, part of this book feels like it wants to make Sarah look super strong, like a strong female character, but in the way that it does that is it just constantly reminds you that she's a victim and she's standing up against her victimization, but she is just a victim. That is the only way that she can be strong, and it is obnoxious. Sarah suggests urgently to her husband that they wait, investigate the ship for what the leper had warned them about, but he won't have it and eventually slaps her for her defiance of daring to be worried that something bad might happen on the ship. He then demands that she go collect their daughter so that they can leave. Now boarded, Arendt is talking to Sammy, who is sure that someone is going to try and do something to the ship, and also Sammy knows that when they get to Amsterdam, Governor Uncle is going to put him to death. It appears that Sammy bought 12 months worth of bodyguard service from Arendt at some point, as Arendt says that he'll talk to Governor Uncle about sparing him because there were 8 months left on their deal to Amsterdam. For the trouble that Sammy is in, he was hired by the governor to recover the folly and was thrown a banquet when it had happened. And then, the next day, the governor pulled him in and demanded he admit guilt. To Sammy's confusion, he was thrown into jail until he were to reconsider admitting guilt. Now, we're not told what he has done at this point, but it's very random that it's like he recovered the folly, which is something that freaking Governor Uncle's child made. So where did the folly get recovered from? Am I missing something here? Because yeah, Leah made the folly. Where did Sammy get the folly from that it's considered he was hired to find it? This feels, I don't know, it feels like a author forgot something. And like, I'm not in a trusting mood with this author, at least in this book, after the way that it goes. What am I missing here? This is why I'm like, somebody please read this and fill me in on like how dumb I am. This is why you get further in the book and you're like, wait a second, this is what you told me before. Am I supposed to forget? Meanwhile, Errant also believes that someone is trying to sink the ship, and I'm also not sure how or why it is so grave so immediately so fast, beyond like the random leper being like, y'all are gonna die. But Errant isn't even superstitious. So like, I think, like, he will tell you he doesn't believe in the devil, he doesn't believe in heaven. So why is he so superstitious? It cannot be the only time he has ever seen a crazy person, but he believes this specific crazy person, quote, that something so large could float was a feat of engineering akin to devilry, and Errant felt immediately diminished in its presence. He stretched out a hand and dragged his fingertips along the coarse plank. There was a dull vibration in the wood. He tried to imagine what was on the other side. The warren of death, staircases, the stray beams of sunlight piercing the gloom. A ship this size would require hundreds of souls to sail her, and would carry that many passengers again. They were all in danger, even chained, even beaten and maltreated. Sammy was the only one who could help them. Errant conveyed his thoughts as eloquently as he was able to. Somebody is trying to sink this ship, and I swim like a bag of rocks. Any chance that you can pull your head out of your arse and do something about it? Sammy grinned at him. You could lead an army over a cliff with that tongue, said sarcastically. Did your search of the leper's body turn anything up? Errant withdrew a piece of hemp that he had hacked off a sack on the dock. Wrapped inside was the charm that the leper had been holding when Errant killed him. It was too charred to make out any detail. It seems that Errant and Sammy are longtime partners of investigating, or at least that's hinted at so far, and Errant both wants to clear Sammy and have them stop whatever this disaster is that is going to befall the ship. They ask the captain the easiest way to sink this massive ship, and once he trusts the lieutenant, he says that it would be the gunpowder store. Errant also says that he is going to go ask around to find who may have known the leper so that they might find what motivated that man to say what he had said and who is working with him. Errant seems to be pretty low confident, and Sammy keeps boosting him up, saying that he's super skillful and stubborn, and he needs to do the heavy work in this case until Sammy has been freed of his restraints of whatever accusation he is under. But for now, you're on your own. Sarah and her daughter Leah are now boarding the ship, and Leah notices how hard the men are working and thinks that they could have worked it easier, because again, you're going to find that this book, you make the ladies be the victims like Sarah, or they are the super geniuses like Leah who make the folly and who know the ship better than anybody and are just super engineering geniuses that outpace all of the dudes and pretty much everybody. Quote, a better pulley joist and they'd need half the labor. I could design one if they won't. They never will, interrupted Sarah. Keep that cleverness in your pocket. We're surrounded by men who won't take kindly to it, however well-intentioned. Leah bit her lip, sulk, staring at the unsatisfactory pulley. It's such a small thing. Why can't I? Because men don't like being made to feel stupid, and there's no other way to feel when you start talking. Sarah stroked her daughter's face, thinking that she could ease the confusion she saw. Cleverness is a type of strength, and they won't accept a woman who's stronger than they are. Their pride won't allow it, and their pride is a thing that they hold dear. She shook her head, unable to find the right words. It's not something to be understood. It's just the way it is. You were sheltered in the fort, surrounded by people who loved you and feared your father, but there is no such protection on the Sardam. This is a dangerous place. Now heed me and think before you speak. Sarah sighed and pulled her close, heart aching. No mother wanted her child to be less than they were. But what use was encourage a child to a thorn bush? It won't be like very much longer, I promise. To add to this, there was something earlier that said, quote, in a boarding, as all other things, etiquette demanded that she be the least important thing in her own life. Just so you know, you could feel how much it's like beating you over the head with this. And this being passed, and this same mindset is being passed on to the daughter, who is a incredibly brilliant, but not allowed to be brilliant, makes all of the men mad. It's not surprising that she was just slapped by her husband for simply suggesting that they put off leaving to check the boat for safety, as he wasn't allowed to be undermined. You would think that she would have approached him a little bit differently, or had a man approach her husband knowing that he doesn't listen to her if she truly wanted something done, because she's been married to him for 15 years. She knows what's not going to work. And if you're like, well, this is a life or death situation, then you're going to try to use the best situation to get what you're trying to accomplish done. And in this case, it is not publicly telling your husband to listen to you when you know he doesn't respect you, also don't respect. The family reaches the ship and are told where their rooms are. The governor uncle is fairly unhappy that his desired room is not the room that he and his wife were given and had reserved. He's told that the room that he had reserved was cursed and bad things always happen in there, including someone hanging themselves. The governor uncle accepts reluctantly that they are moved and tells his wife and child to go to their respective rooms while he checks out the cargo. On that, it should be noted that there isn't any entertainment on the ship. It's not a luxury ship. This is a merchant ship that is also carrying passengers. Meanwhile, Sarah would rather warn fellow dignitaries on board, and then we have Krishi Jen, and who is going to be kind of a sister wife to Sarah. She is the mistress to Governor Uncle, and Sarah knows that she is a mistress. Sarah pretty much okays it because she doesn't want to sleep with her husband. And the only reason she sleeps with her husband is because he wants her to give him an heir. But otherwise, he's uninterested. So she goes to Kriji Jen and tells the woman of her fears about the ship. Leah, the daughter, is afraid of Sarah defying her husband because Leah has seen her mother black and blue and limping after being punished for disobedience. But Sarah says this is something that she needs to do. Even if she is punished later, she has to do it. And with how violent Governor Uncle is, you would think that there would be some sort of resistance, at least on Leah's part, more fear showing, but we have very shallow characterization for any of the relationships or historical precedents, set characters. You don't even have Krishi commenting on, Sarah being beat, which whatever. If you're going to say that it was normal at the time, so then nobody would really comment on how black and blue and limping she is, they would probably still say something, be worried about her health, right? She gets to Kriji's room where the woman is playing with her two sons. Sarah sends the sons off with her daughter to go and play in another room while the women talk. It turns out, not only is Kriji, now you might be wondering how Krishi with two sons is Governor Uncle's mistress. Well, she is so incredibly beautiful that pretty much every man falls for her. She's had she's had two previous husbands, and her children are from the second husband. We'll learn about him. We'll learn about him later. Sarah warns Krishi that she needs to get off the ship as they've been warned that something bad is going to happen. When Krishi goes, do you really think that Krishi could just leave as being the mistress when it's an 8-month trip and husband wouldn't be angry? When Krishi learns that a madman made the warning, Sarah mentions that Sammy is taking it seriously, and this causes Krishi to also take it serious. They ask how they'll find out anything, being dignitary women, and this is when Sarah calls for a carpenter, claiming that the room is ill-fit, and they are going to investigate this way, because it's assumed that the leper was a carpenter, and so then some of the other carpenters on ship are assumed known of the leper, and if they just get one's attention, even in their quarters, they should be able to ask questions. More people get on the ship, and Sammy is taken to his cell, in which he will ride the ship in. Errant tries to stop them from taking Sammy away, but he is fought and can't save Sammy from the passenger. Sander Kurse and his ward Isabel climb aboard the ship unnoticed. Isabel is just looking for a way off of the dangerous island, and she is choosing to go with Sander, who is a man who has some kind of magical monster witch book. On board, he opens the book and goes through it. Quote, Sander finally found the page they wanted, a naked old man with spiny wings riding a monstrous creature that had a bat's head and a wolf's body. The man had claws instead of hands and was using them to stroke the cheek of a young boy being pinned down by the wolf. The creature was snarling, its tongue lolling as if laughing at the terrified boy's predicament. On the opposite page was a symbol that resembled an eye with a tail. Beneath it was a strange incantation. Meanwhile, nearby, Errant is fighting with the guard captain about taking Sammy away. A sword to his chest, Sanders urges, Do it. Do it now. Yeah, in the standoff, guard captain is trying to decide whether or not to release the hold that he has on Errant because he is not the only one in a disadvantaged position. As Captain Guard has a sword at Errant's chest, Errant has a knife at a different soldier/crewman's neck. Quote, Errant's words betrayed none of his uncertainty. There wasn't a fouler individual alive than a musketeer in the United East India Company. The job paid poorly and so attracted only the blackest hearts, those content to pursue a reckless course far from home because home was where the hangman. Once away, their only concern was amusement and survival, and woe betide anybody who came between. The only way to command such men was through fear. Drek would have to know which offenses to turn a blind eye to, and which insults required blood. If Drek didn't kill him, if he didn't defend the honor these men didn't have, they'd call it weakness. For the next 8 months, he'd be fighting to get back even a pinch of the authority he'd boarded with. Does Governor Uncle know that all of these people are shady? Is Governor Uncle usually involved with shady people? Considering Governor Uncle wiping out a bunch of people, I wouldn't be surprised if he, knows a bunch of criminals and is chilled with a bunch of criminals, but it also seems very questionable to, load up your wife and child and mistress and their 2 children onto the ship that is mainly made up of, is that normal? Sammy uses his survival skills, that is, he's a master of many trades and scamming and reading people, and guesses that 2 of the men in this scene have played gambling against each other recently and one of them cheated. Once he leads them to anger with one another, they're shoved off by the captain, and Sammy gets the guard captain to agree to keep him safe as best as he can while incarcerated. Still, he gets brought down to his cell, some level of protection from the dubious crew. Sammy demands that Errant find people to help him solve this mystery, because he's going to have to investigate on his own. Don't seek assistance in freeing him from prison first. Seek information on the ship, who wants to hurt them, etc. That's more pressing as they have 8 months to free him from the prison. Errant feels incredibly unprepared to do this. Over to Sarah again. She gets a younger carpenter in the area. His name is Henry, and after complimenting him on his friendliness, then offering him a super big tip, he reluctantly offers information about the tongueless leper from the dock. We find out that that man's name is Bosie, and he liked to talk a lot, had a messed up foot from a pirate attack, but it was their boatswain, Johannes Wick, who cut Bosie's tongue out. This followed Bosie saying something about making a big deal in Batavia that was gonna make him rich. Before his tongue was cut out, he had said the word laxagar, and Sarah thinks that it sounds Nornish, but there's no one on the ship that speaks Nornish other than Johannes Wick. The carpenter says Wick won't be talking for as cheaply as he did. Also, the carpenter confirms that it's unlikely that Bosie had leprosy because he never would have been on the ship if he had. The crew is setting out to sea, giving the warning that things could get choppy, there might be pirate attacks, but they'll be ready to defend if they wish to go home. Quote, all eyes were on the symbol on the sail, so nobody saw Creasy Jens grip the railing of the quarter-deck, the color draining out of her cheek. Nobody saw Sander curse close the book held in Isabel's hands, hiding the picture of the eye drawn there. Nobody saw the boatswain, Johannes Wick, touch his eye patch in memory, and nobody saw Errant stare incredulously at the scar on his wrist, which was exactly the same shape as the mark on the sail. The guard captain tells Errant where he can find the captain. Errant's sitting there, thinking about how lucky he was that he didn't get stabbed in that fight earlier. Quote, he'd been lucky a lot recently. These last few years, he'd started making mistakes, seeing things too late. As he got older, he was getting slower. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of his body like a bag of rocks he couldn't put down. Near misses were getting nearer, close calls closer. One day soon, he wouldn't see his killer's feet, wouldn't hear their shuffling or catch their shadow drawing up the wall. Death kept flipping a coin, and Errant kept taking the odds. Seemed like madness, even to him. He should have quit a long time ago, but he didn't trust anybody else to protect Sammy. That pride seemed ridiculous now. Sammy was in a cell aboard the imperiled ship, and Errant had nearly got himself killed before they'd even left Batavia. But why is he so attached to Sammy? We never find out. You'd think initially this was oh, he got hired for 12 months to be his bodyguard. Okay, So it's a job, and he has pride in his job, and he wants to see through every contract because he's a man of his words to like a very literal extent. But then this goes, oh, he's the only one that can protect this person, and he knows it. Does he mean like on this ship or like period? Because I don't understand this level of attached, because it doesn't really show in anything. And even at the end, when we get to Sammy, like who Sammy really is, Sammy doesn't think that great of Errant. He's ready to kill Errant if things don't go the way that he wants them to go. So like, they're not that close. But this implies that they are closer. And again, it feels like a red herring of the author trying to trick you, to throw you off because of the brilliant reveal at the end. There continues to be hints at much more being involved in Errant and Sammy's relationship than him simply being paid, but that is never further explored, and why. Shown in the cabin where he'll be staying with the other men, Errant listens to some of them argue about where they don't want to stay on the ship, rooms shifted around to make room for the governor uncle's secret cargo that was brought in the middle of the night, and no one knows what's in it. Then old witchy man Sander Kurz and Isabel appear in the area to talk to the captain. Quote, "You'll find precious little welcome here, Sanders Kurz," said Captain Crawwell, "because Jonah was cursed by God for sailing against his divine will, and now sailors believe all holy men bring ill fortune," said Sander, his tone suggesting he'd heard a warning more than once. "I have little patience for superstition, Captain. God's plan for each of us is writ in the heavens long before we're born. If this ship flounders, it's because he has chosen to close his fist around it. I will welcome his will and go before him with humility." Isabel murmured in agreement. The rapt expression on her face suggested that they all be lucky to be drowned so devoutly. Crawwells sent the metal disc spinning into the air and caught it again. "Aye, well, if you've come to complain about your quarters, then I've no quarrel with my accommodations. My needs are few," said the predicant, who'd obviously taken umbrage at the presumption. "I wish to discuss your rule prohibiting me from traveling past the mainmast. Here, Sander Kurz asks to walk amongst the crew as he needs, and insists that despite the danger, he should be allowed. The captain eventually agrees, but says that his female ward cannot go with him as the crew is dangerous and he won't risk a mutiny over lust. Isabel is happy with this, but Sander Kurz cuts her off and leads them out. Errant then starts talking to the captain about the maimed employee of the ship, obviously trying to get info about Bose. Van Schuten, the chief merchant, gives Errant a bill for the items that he broke on the shore when putting an end to the leper. The way that he is being rude to Errant isn't being accepted once Governor Uncle walks in and starts yelling that if you don't treat Errant with respect, then he'll have a man cut your tongue out. After Van Schuten stammers some apology, Governor Uncle tells Errant to come with him. They need to talk. This is where we learn that Errant is Governor Uncle's nephew, which is likely where some of the extra protection and favoritism has come from. They talk about the strange symbol that appeared on the sail, a cursed symbol that has followed Errant around since childhood. That is, when he came back from a hunting trip with his father had died, and his village assumed that he had killed the man, and they all started to hate him. Errant, in revenge and mischief against them, started putting the symbol, like his scar, on doors belonging to his neighbors' houses, and then something bad would befall those houses, like a curse. Errant eventually stopped placing the mark, but it kept showing up and whipped the villagers into a bit of a superstitious frenzy until one day they blamed old man named Old Tom as being the originator of the evil after the disappearance of a young boy. Old Tom was poor and had no way to fight back. The villagers came together and beat him to death. The evil mark stopped appearing, and the town congratulated themselves on doing away with the evil. Now, because of this, you would think that Errant wouldn't be against superstition, wouldn't be against like the ideas of demons, but it doesn't tell you any reason why he is non-spiritual or is actually against superstition or spirituality when this thing has followed him around and has appeared in these weird ways. This symbol is now what the hex on the ship looks like, inviting the devil to it. Governor Uncle tells Errant that he needs to get to the bottom of this and that he may have whatever resources he needs in order to solve this beyond, letting Sammy out of jail. That's not happening. So Governor Uncle can't really be that worried if he's still like, we've got Master Detective downstairs, but we're not going to freaking use him. Put shackles on him and use him if you are scared. This is another non-logical choice. Even if Governor Uncle is angry at freaking Sammy for being a spy, do you want to die? Because you know what this man's skill is. And this whole plot could have been averted if Governor Uncle wasn't such a tool of the author that he actually used the resources at his disposal, because they're all threatened. Arendt still says that he is nowhere near as equipped to deal with this as Sammy, and that Sammy can lift up reality and look at the bones beneath it, but Governor Uncle will not release Sammy and will not tell Arendt what Sammy did. For Arendt's ignorance is part of his benefit in the trial. That is going to hit Amsterdam. That's the only reason he's holding the information from it. The two of them are so close that if Arendt were to know anything about Sammy's crime, he figures that he would be implicated, so his ignorance is his best argument for his innocence. Governor Uncle also assures Arendt that Sammy is guilty and that the crime is terrible. It's so forced. So it appears that Arendt is on his own, with both Sammy and Governor Uncle pushing him to look on his own. Sammy said he doesn't know what he's being accused of, but at the same time, he absolutely is certain that he won't be let out. This feels, again, like it's very lazy, because it's like the author knew that he needed to get rid of Sammy somehow, but also didn't have an idea yet. And so then didn't ever accuse Sammy of anything. With Sammy being this mastermind, he didn't even set up anything for Arendt. I don't know what we're doing here. Arendt goes to the cargo where the gunpowder is and asks about the likelihood of being attacked, as well as who is most likely on board to be attacked to do the most damage. He's told that if Captain Crawwell's were to be attacked, then the ship would suffer the most. But it's unlikely that anybody would go against him, since he's not only a fierce fighter, but he takes care of the men, and he will beat the hell out of you if you betray him. He's seen as a good captain for how he makes sure that everyone gets home and gets paid fairly, even for being criminals, so everyone puts up with the situation. The constable says that if the captain were to die, the first mate would also be unable to keep in line because the first mate lacks respect. Sarah and Leah are now on the deck when Mistress Krigi joins them to mention her ex-husband Peter was involved in magic. Peter is her second husband and the father of her children. He had banished an evil spirit from their home back when he was still alive, the thing related to the symbol on the sails, Old Tom. Arendt appears to the two women and is introduced to Krigi, who immediately starts flirting with him because she can't help, but that's quickly pushed aside as they continue to talk about Bosie and Old Tom, how Old Tom was this devil spirit, this devil man who feeds on suffering. When asked why he would leave Batavia and follow them when there is so much suffering in Batavia, for he would never go hungry, Krigi says that it is to finish her off. Peter had freed its followers and banished it from the province. In return, the creature slayed Peter and went after his whole family, but Krigi was able to escape before it did, and now it followed her onto the boat to chase after her, to finish everything. Now my question is, how long ago did Peter die that she is saying this, and how long has she been chased by this thing? You know, she's obviously making stuff up, but how long ago was that she has not died yet from Old Tom hunted down? At the end of the day, Arendt goes to the sailor area. Even Wick is there, but none of them will help him. They're rowdy and rude and not interested in assisting the lieutenant, even when he mentions the Governor Uncle's name. So Arendt asks about getting help from the boatswain, and they mock him before off. During the night, they aren't traveling anymore, to the Governor Uncle's annoyance, because he can't see, and they explain it as they can't see attack or really where they're going, so the captain doesn't push. The captain also sees a storm on the horizon that will catch up with them in the next day or so. There's a recap of the main cast, mostly gathered in a room as Sarah and Mistress Krigi talk to each other. Krigi tells Sarah that she should go catch up with Arendt. He does. He's with Guard Captain Drecht, where they talk about whether the devil exists or not. Drecht doesn't believe it, so, quote, "You don't believe in devils, Drecht?" asked Arendt. Fiddle here and tightening one of the strings. "Don't see the use of 'em," he said, picking a trapped moth out of his beard and crushing it in his fingers. "I've never seen one standing over a dead child. I ain't ever seen one ravage a woman or set fire to a hut with a family still inside. You've been on a battlefield, Hayes. You know what men are when nobody's ordering them to be better. They don't need Old Tom whispering suggestions in their ear. Evil comes from in here. It's born in us. It's what we are when you take away the uniforms and the ranks and the order." Sarah had to battle for that lesson. Her entire life had been spent in study of men, not in love or admiration, as was the proper way for a woman, but from fear. Men were dangerous. They were fickle of mood, liable to lash out when disappointed, and they were frequently disappointed, most often by their own shortcomings, though only a would tell them as much. "If you don't think the devil's prowling this boat, what's responsible for that mark on the sail?" prodded Errant. I reckon one of the crew's got a hold of the story and is playing tricks on these betters. Drek flung his hand toward the waist of the ship. By the reaching flame of the running light, Sarah could just see the crew singing and dancing to flutes and drums. The shrieks, the laughter, and sudden eruptions of violence made Sarah's skin crawl. Nothing but spite and boredom at work on this, you mark me. After Guard Captain Drek leaves, Errant and Sarah spend time together, talking of her past, thinking of her past, the freedoms that she wants to give herself and Leo once they hit Amsterdam and get away from Governor Uncle. And he plays some music that reminds her more of the past, and he asks her if she believes that there are demons on the ships. Drek hadn't asked her and says yes. Quote, growing up, she'd been taught that demons walked the earth to torment sinners. Off-forked tongues came alluring promises, but they were tricks with only hell waiting at the end. Those who trusted in God's love would see through their deceits and be sheltered from harm, as she believed that those who fell prey to the wickedness of demons were somehow deserving. But that hadn't saved Krishi's husband, and if old Tom was willing to sink the Sardom to hurt Krishi, it wouldn't save anybody else. Then he walks her to her bedroom on board. Inside the window in her cabin is a bloodied leper and his bloodied bandit. Though Sarah screams the moment she sees the leper, people run in. The men hear her complaint but disbelieve her and tell her not to share it around. There's too much superstition on the ship already, and someone will believe it, and someone will believe her, and it'll cause trouble if she mentions the leper. Errant goes down to see Sammy in the prison. He runs into a bit of trouble as Johannes Wick is beating the carpenter that Sarah had talked to earlier, and he's getting beaten probably for telling Sarah pretty much anything at all. He won't stop, and although Errant tries to help Henry rejects the assistance offered as it would just get him in more trouble for wussing out on taking his punishment. Errant continues down to Sammy's cell and lets him out so that he can go for a midnight walk as he is allowed. I don't know. He's allowed to go for a midnight walk on this merchant ship, but he's not allowed to help solve the mystery. Excuse me? It doesn't make any sense. Especially with like, oh, Governor Uncle is like, he's a bad man. Don't trust him. He is so bad. He is not allowed anywhere near here. You're not allowed to talk to him, but he is so bad, believe me. But also you can go for a midnight walk and let him shit off the side of the deck, which he does. We get a description every time they go for a walk of him pooping off the side of the boat and how smelly it is. Anyway, Sammy thinks that he is being given this benefit because Errant had traded something for it, but Errant says that it was just a favor. Theoretically, it says Sammy doesn't know of the familial connection between Errant and Governor Uncle, and then asks why the man would do him such a favor. Now, we know that Sammy is lying. I don't appreciate the narration lying, but turns out that Sammy doesn't even know that Errant is from a very, very, very wealthy family. But Errant turned away from that life because he had more morals and didn't care about politics. And he is a better man than literally everybody. I told you, he is presented as the goodest good boy that is wagging his fingers at everybody for not being as good as him. And he is the poster child of the rich. Quote, "Why the hell are you on this ship?" he exploded. "Your family could buy you a ship of your own. They could buy you a fleet." "What would I do with a fleet?" "Anything you damn well please." Errant couldn't deny the logic of it, but he didn't have an answer that wouldn't embarrass them both. He left home at 20 because after 7 years of studying under the gentleman seven, he'd seen the breadth of life and offer and realized how small it was. The rich mistakenly believed their wealth was a servant delivering them whatever they wanted. They were wrong. Wealth was their master, and it was the only voice they heeded. Friendships were sacrificed at its behest, principles trampled to protect it. No matter how much they had, it was never enough. They went mad chasing more until they sat lonely atop their hoard, despised and afraid. Errant had wanted more. Having turned his back on power and wealth, he found himself immune to their lure. Instead, he sought a place where honor mattered, where strength was used to protect the weak, and thrones weren't automatically handed from one madman to the next. But every land was the same. Strength was the only currency of merit, and power was the only goal. Kindness, compassion, and empathy were trampled, exploited as weakness. Then he'd met Sammy. Here was a commoner, born with nothing, who'd upended the natural order by virtue of his cleverness. In pursuit of his goal, he'd accused a noble as readily as a peasant. Here was somebody for whom the old rules didn't apply, through Sammy, Errant saw the world he aspired, like a distant land spied through a smudged glass. Sammy was what Errant had left home to find, but their friendship would never allow him to admit it. He'd never hear the end of it. This makes me ask so many questions. Number one, if Arendt is this great person who turned his back on the corruption of the rich people, why hasn't he said anything to his governor uncle? Even just his governor uncle, how his governor uncle treats his aunt. He watched his uncle smack her around in public, and he doesn't see that as a problem, though he is this more moral guy than the rest of the universe. And then you have him say that he came out here and found what he was looking for. He wanted moral and kindness and compassion and empathy, and they were all trampled on the world that he came from in order for them to be exploited. And then he found Sammy, who gave him hope. But Sammy doesn't give a shit about anybody. Like, Sammy just sees everybody as an opportunity for him to solve problems. He only looks at the cases and how he can use his brain. And at the end of this, he doesn't even go like, hey, Sammy, I got a problem with you. And he's like, I admire this guy because this guy will call rich people criminals as much as peasants, but he only cares about freaking making rich people suffer. He only cares about punishing the rich people because he thinks that they are more corrupt than the poor people. Arendt and Sammy are looking over the deck where Sarah saw the leper, and Arendt's telling Sammy what happened at the time. He says that he believes someone was there, and he believes Sarah even though the others don't, but they can't make sense of what that might have been in the window. A flashback to a bit of Arendt's childhood. He yawned in church, and as punishment, his father beat him so bad that he went into a coma for a few days, where they thought that he'd never wake up. His mom cried from this, and she got beat too, as her grief showed Arendt's dad that she lacked a faith in God. So again, we're going with All Men Suck book. It was while unconscious that Arendt determined God wasn't real, and neither was the devil. Okay, so like, he doesn't believe in the devil. Quote, Arendt had been returned 2 days later. Devotion had nothing to do with it. Most people woke up from something like that with a hole in their memory. They felt like they had been asleep, they said. Arendt remembered everything. He'd traveled into the afterlife, hollering for help and hearing nothing back. He knew that there was no God waiting, no devil, no saints or sinners. There was only people and the stories that they'd told themselves. He'd seen it himself. People gave the heavens a voice so that they had something to ask for. A better harvest, a healthy child, a milder winter. God was hope, and mankind needed hope the way it needed warmth, food, and ale. But with hope, the downtrodden yearned for stories to explain their misfortune. Though what they really wanted was somebody to blame for their misery. It was impossible to set fire to the blight that had ruined their crops, but a blight was easily summoned by a witch, at which point any poor woman could do. Arendt then tells Sammy about the scar on his hand, going hunting with his father, and the background of old Tom as far as he knows. Quote, show me, demanded Sammy, pulling Arendt over to a lantern on the mizzen-mast, and tell me everything you know about it. I don't know anything except that I drew this mark on a few doors in a nearby village out of spite, explained Arendt, as I didn't realize that the harm it would do. An old beggar called Old Tom ended up being beaten to death by some scared villager. Old Tom? Repeated. So this mark got free of you and then spread like a plague, wearing the dead beggar's name. This isn't just a demon, it's your demon. It was an accident. The worst things often are. That conversation doesn't make sense if he doesn't believe in the devil or the heavens. Like, okay, Arendt, explain how this symbol is jumping around, and like, where do you think it came from? How did it get on this ship? Who is stalking you? Because if he's going to be like, well, I don't believe in the devil, so this is something more logical, this is something more calculable, like mortal. Okay, start telling us what some of your ideas are about where the symbol is coming from and how it is manifested the way that it did. Because I don't really understand how you can think that this thing stalked you in that town, got that guy killed, showed up again. Somebody else, Kriji, also believes that this thing is a devil because her ex-husband was murdered by old Peter, and you still don't have like a belief for any of this. It's such a weird thing to make this whole thing like revolve around the devil that is revolving specifically around this character that doesn't believe in anything. And you can do it. I'm not saying you can't make the devil circle this non-believer, but at least give us a reason for how he can disagree with these weird happenings around him following him since boyhood, because I don't understand. The man who killed old Tom was Kriji's previous husband, Peter, and she is connected to Arendt's uncle. Arendt also asked if his governor uncle would have recommended that he be on this ship and what might take this ship down. Arendt's assured that governor uncle would have made sure that he was on this ship and that the only warning they had of the ship going down would be that the captain was taken out. The explosives/ammo stock wasn't really a risk. Sammy brings attention to the wooden charm that Lerm is wearing and how the other half of it was the same thing Bosie the leper had been clinging to on the docks when he died. How they know it's the exact same thing since it was burnt to a crisp, I'm not really sure, but now they've determined that they can tell that they are wearing the same necklace. He says that it might be a point of something to look into. While these two are talking, they also hear a commotion, which is Ward Isabel being grabbed by first mate Isaac Larn for sneaking around after curfew. He warns her that she needs to not be walking around for her own sake because the men on the ship are dogs. She's released with a warning and returned to her room. During the night, they're attacked by a ghost ship in the distance, but as they are prepared to fight it, it backs away and it's gone. Church in chapel on the ship, everybody is spooked about what's going on, and there are some things missing from the ship and demanded that whoever has taken them needs to come forward. After Sanders gives his sermon, Sarah, Creasy, and Van Schuten approach separately, wanting to talk to Sander private. Van Schuten is wanting to confess something. Sarah and Creasy get their chance to talk to him first, and they tell him about old Tom bringing up Peter Fletcher, Creasy's husband, as the one who had expelled it before. It turns out Sander was close friends with and mentored Peter and has things to tell Creasy. Sarah insists that she needs to go to breakfast with her husband, but Creasy won't speak to Sander alone, so she tells her servant Dorothea to send a message to Errant Hayes. Sanders objects to this as well because Sander doesn't want any knowing on. The reason Sander is here is because Peter had actually called him in a letter asking for help, but that letter was sent some years after Peter was already dead. So now we have to be like, okay, so old Tom killed Peter, has been hunting this chick to finish the job, but Peter has been dead for years. How did he never find her on Batavia? Still, Peter is sent asking for Sanders' help to get rid of this creature that had been haunting. Sanders also has a book of demon creatures that is basically a witch hunter's Bible. There's a description of what old Tom looks like. Quote, it showed a naked man with bat wings riding a wolf with a bat head. The wolf was pinning down a young boy, and the old man was stroking his cheek with a clawed hand. A ring of cowl leapt surrounded them. Did we just get a repeated description of something we got earlier that didn't really have a context for it? Is that an editing issue? Since no one has seen that image, they're not sure who old Tom is possessing, if old Tom is possibly possessing one of the passengers. Now, if he is, they need to go find out who, where, what's up. Creasy looks at the letter Saunders supposedly received from her dead husband and states that it has his seal, but that is not his penmanship. Saunders was likely lured here by something, and she's questioned what. He says that he is the last person on the witch-finding order, and everyone else has disappeared or died, and he has been in hiding for years. Now, they're trying to figure out who might most likely be possessed by old Tom. Quote, you have to find it first, Sarah, unnerved by the zeal. If old Tom could be possessing anybody on this ship, why do you trust us? Sander peered at him. You're unimportant, he said bluntly. Old Tom is prideful. Those he possesses are powerful or strong. They have influence enough to go where he wishes, and that influence grows in power the longer he controls. Rancor and ruin remanate from old Tom the way that shadows follow us across the deck. I've heard stories about you, Sarah. Your husband beat you, isn't that so? She flushed. Sander continued relentlessly. Old Tom would never have allowed such a thing to exist. Mistress Yen solved a suspicion because of her husband. He was the foremost expert on old Tom and would not have been fooled. Is it not conceivable old Tom took control of Creasy after Peter was murdered? Asked Leah, who had taken a seat on their bunk. Creasy shot her a glance, but Leah shrugged. I don't believe that you're a devil, but somebody had to ask the question, she said seriously. Only a soul that bargains with old Tom can be possessed by it, and I can see that little in your personal circumstances to suggest that you've acquired that kind of power. The same reasoning absolves Isabel, who is a beggar when I apprenticed her into my order. And you, Sander Curse? Asked Sarah. Why should we trust you? She expected him to become angry, but he laughed merrily. A question worthy of a witch-finder, he said. If I were old Tom, I would have little reason to divulge what I have, and besides, plucked at his tatty robes, witch-finding offers few rewards. I had to beg alms enough for our births from my congregation in Batavia. Okay, so if old Tom only goes after people with power and authority and who are strong, then how does this connect to the old Tom from Aaron's Village? Is the old Tom from Aaron's Village a completely different mythology than the one in the Witchfinder book? How are these connected at all? Another thing is, Leah is just kind of around to ask random questions because she's supposed to be smarter than everybody else. But they also ask, why couldn't it be Creasy? And dude looks at Creasy and goes, well, she obviously has not has not made a deal with anybody. Look at her position. But like, she is beyond hot. Like, she is so hot that it is a plot device at the end of the book. Like, all I'm saying for is her hotness paid for this Reuben Goldberg device of a murder. Okay? Who says that she did not make a deal with the devil to be hot? That should be on the table for questionable choices. Especially because she is so hot that people look at her, and unless they are very specifically better people, they go for her. We continue, not to write anyone off as being a possibility. Quote, "You mustn't be fooled by Erin's demeanor," Sanders said, rebuking her. "Demons disguise themselves in all sorts of ways. I've seen it and time again. It's their skills to make themselves as appealing as possible, so we follow them willingly into damnation." He pinched the bridge of his nose. "I don't know if Errant is the demon, only that he could be. Any of the wealthier passengers or the senior crew could be. Any souls that bargain with old Tom can shelter it. 30 years ago, in the provinces, Peter chased it the noble to noble and was constantly surprised by the petty trifles they agreed to give their soul away for. Errant Hayes is a famous soldier with a life lived entirely in bloodshed. Through Samuel Pipes, he has access to any king in the land. He cannot be discounted." So they're like, don't be fooled. They disguise themselves in a bunch of ways to be as attractive as possible. And overlooking Creasy over here? Bruh, I think you've fallen for the devil. Because how do you overlook that? Sanders announced that they must find Old Tom and exorcise it. Quote, "After Old Tom's herald announces its presence, as it did on the sail, 3 unholy miracles always follow, each carrying its mark. They're different every time, but they're meant to convince us of its power. Like the burning bush that appeared to Moses," supplied Isabel. "Once the unholy miracles begin, that's when we'll hear Old Tom's voice offering our heart's desires in return for some terrible deeds." He turned over the page. The village burned, bodies piled up on the ground. The villagers were attacking one another with hoes and pitchforks, setting fire to their own homes with torches. Lepers circled them, holding hands, watching carnage and delight, and behind them the devils prowled, its tongue lolling. "After the 3rd unholy miracle is performed, anybody who didn't bargain with Old Tom is slaughtered by those who did," Sanders said, "and those who survive are dispatched to sow the seeds of his malevolence everywhere else. This is what awaits the Sardom if we don't act." How about just calling it like a curse instead of, a unholy miracle? Because it doesn't sound like a miracle to me if, it's just going to kill things. With that, stakes have now been stated. It took us a while to get here, by the way, and it's very straightforward. About 35% of the way, this is where we're at. They don't know where Old Tom is or what the next sign will be, but the longer he's aboard, the more time he has to unleash, and not in the dark romance, romantasy sort of way. The next morning, Errant is having breakfast with Governor Uncle, and Sarah is surprised about how good a mood Governor Uncle is in, since normally he's quiet and grouchy and tries to finish his breakfast as quickly as possible to get the frick away from his family. However, on this morning, he is asking Errant some moral questions, comparing it to his own actions that he took for his business. Quote, "Oblivious to family etiquette, he had immediately started joking with her husband, speaking to him in a way that she'd never heard anybody else dare. Her husband was typically a distant, formal presence at breakfast, but he had responded in boisterous fashion, reminiscing about Frisia, where he and Errant had grown up. He told stories about fighting a war of independence against the Spanish, then more stories about becoming a merchant, and after that, the Governor-General of Batavia. In Errant's company, he was transferred. How would you have handled the dispute differently?" pushed her husband. "Come now, Errant, you're known as an honorable man, and your grandfather thought you were more passingly clever. What would you have done?" "Blood is a poor way to settle a dispute," said Errant quietly. "Every man has a right to eat what he grows and be paid proper when he barters it. I don't understand why the company didn't honor that." The Governor-General took another sip of wine. As promised, he didn't seem offended. If anything, he appeared contemplative. "But you've killed before," he said. "Obeyed orders to kill?" "Aye. Men marching under banners," responded Errant, clearly uncomfortable. "Men who meant to kill me first." "Men you were paid to kill. That's mercenary work, isn't it? Coin and contract." "Yes. The people of Branda Island broke the contract," said her husband, leaning forward and clasping his hands. "We paid them to cultivate and deliver mace. When the boat arrived to collect the cargo, they killed 2 of our men and drove the boat away." Sarah's lips moved in silent argument. Her words never touched the air. She knew better than to voice her outrage. Her husband brought up the Branda Islands frequently in conversation. He bullied people into agreeing with what he'd done, horrific as it had been. For some reason, he seemed to enjoy seeing them buckle. "Because the contract wasn't fair," refuted Arendt. "They were being paid poorly and feared for their future under such terms. Your men tried to take the crops by force." The Governor-General shrugged. "They signed the same contract I did. They knew the terms." "You could have paid them fair," Sarah ventured, appalled by her boldness. "The Branda Islands are a wretched hovel," said her husband contemptuously. "What use is the wealth if they waste it buying beads from the English? They have no arts, they have no culture, no debate. They exist as we must have first existed when God brought us forth from clay." He shook his head sorrowfully and intent upon Arendt, as if he were the mercenary who'd made the point. "Are we to leave them that way? The company doesn't simply bring wealth, it brings civilization. It's the light and the darkness. Society is built upon contracts, upon the promises that we make to each other and the coins that we pay for them. There are bad ones, of course, but they must be honored and learnt from. That's what I did. It's what your grandfather did. The people of Banda Island met ink with blood, and I could not allow that to stand. If I did, other tribes would have followed. The contract, the company's word, would have meant nothing, and its future would have been imperiled." "You wiped out an entire island," stated Arendt, clearly unable to comprehend his uncle's coldness. "Every man, woman, and child. Yes!" He banged a fist on the table at each word. "One slaughter so there would never need to be another, and there hasn't been." Arendt could only stare at him. This feels so over the top for like how evil. It's like, look, I'm all for corporations bad, but like, this is so over the top of like evil man, bad man, murder everybody for money. And how is Sarah even involved in this? I understand she's got her own sorts of bravery, but this doesn't seem like the time for her to be inputting her like, you want to tell me that she's been beaten physically multiple times. Somehow her life has not actually gone to like threatened mode. With how hard she's been beaten in 15 years. Her husband hasn't accidentally like pushed it too far on her when he is this cold, and she still has the willingness to like disagree with him when she knows that it doesn't make any sense. It feels like it's just like safe victimhood, where she is beat, but she's never actually in danger because the author is in complete control. That's how it feels to me. It's just for show. We are dealing with the devil in the dark water here, and it only seems fair to show the full devil that the governor uncle is. He doesn't just mistreat his wife and child, or all women it seems he comes in contact with, but he mistreats every single person, and for what gain but personal monetary enrichment and the expansion of his business, and the expense of others he deems lesser than himself, which is everybody. Except for Arendt. It looks like he has some respect for Arendt, though for what reason, I don't know, because you would think that Arendt's morals would be like a personal failing. Once that conversation comes to an end, they move on to discuss what they know about old Tom, how if they find what his deal was that he made and understand his death, they may be able to track old Tom down before anybody else gets hurt. The king of cruelty over here decides that it's his place to warn them all, quote, "Don't mistake this monster for your typical foe," warned her husband, watching as a loaf of bread was placed on the table with a huge knife laid beside it. "When it attacked the provinces, it used people's desires against them. Anybody who has ever held a grudge or coveted the possessions of another, anybody who has ever believed themselves wronged or overlooked, these people are its prey, which make this ship a feast." He chewed the chicken as he spoke. "Believe me, Arendt, it's a creature far more subtle and far more cunning than any you've ever faced before." If he is this, like, Arendt, be careful. Be careful of this creature. Why did he say, well, we're not actually going to wait to see what the leper said about what's on the ship? Is it because of the symbol on the flag that he is now like, wait a second. But also, they've only been on this boat for one day. Turn the boat around and go back to Batavia. Don't be on this boat for 8 months when you've been on it for not even a day and you can go back because it's cursed. Where is the logic for this? Especially if Governor Uncle is starting to feel his own level of superstition. Also, after this man just kind of laughed at murdering an entire island to expand his company, I'd say that's a pretty big red flag for some old Tom possession action going on, right? Aaron asks that Sammy be released to help solve this, and Governor Uncle says, I might be worried. I'm not that worried, though, no. I cannot believe nobody said, hey, should we turn this boat around then and, like, get on a different boat? Or, like, I don't know, just go back to Batavia. It's not that far. Maybe if this was, like, months in and they were in the middle of the ocean before this happened, it would make sense. Which also, Sammy... Bad planning, poor planning. You should have waited until you were at least a week out into the ocean, but like maybe a month. Because a day out, you're not going to lose anything by just turning around. Aaron leaves after breakfast and Sarah follows. He asks her how long Governor Uncle has been like this, because this certainly wasn't the man that he remembers from his childhood. Governor Uncle used to be like a really nice guy, like the best man. But now he just kills entire villages for nothing. Sarah states that he's been like this for the 15 years that she has known him. So, and if you're wondering if we're going to get more on like what changed or if Aaron doesn't remember him correctly, no, Aaron never actually gives us an example of what Governor Uncle was like when he was a kid, and we never explore what changed Governor Uncle. Other than, I think it says that Governor Uncle made a deal with Old Tom at some point, but also Old Tom isn't real. So I don't know. And this book kind of plays back and forth with whether Old Tom is real or not the entire time. And there's no, like, for me, I didn't find a solid mythology for Old Tom, but you know, maybe it was just my own struggle. Aaron goes on deck to ask the captain about the attack last night, and they're not sure who the other ship was, but it disappeared very quickly before anyone could see the flag. He asks Sarah then to help him with the investigation, to which she's surprised. Quote, nobody trusted me with anything more pressing than small talk for a very long time. I can't do this alone, said Aaron, unable to meet her gaze. I don't know how, and you have to knack for asking the right questions. I'd like your help, if you'll give it. Most men would say that this isn't woman's work. There was no mistaking the challenge in her tone. My father was one of them, admitted Aaron. He taught me that women were frail creatures, purposefully crippled by God, that men might prove their virtue by protecting them. Sounded right enough until I went to war and saw men pleading for their lives while women swung hoes at the knights trying to take their land. His tone hardened. Strong is strong and weak is weak, and it doesn't matter if you wear breeches or skirts if you're the latter. Life will hammer you flat. I didn't realize that Arendt was going to be a male feminist, because that's, like, there's defending women and there's not being an asshole, you know, like Governor Uncle is. And then there's specifically what feels like male feminist talking points in a derogatory way, which is like Aaron's going, you go girl. I'm going to give you this job because this is like, you go girl. I get Aaron is in over his head because he doesn't believe that he can mentally think through anything. But this just feels so forced. And that conversation, like that bit there, where it's like, yeah, all of the men soldiers that I fought with were freaking on their knees while women were throwing hose. You do not need to lower men, to insult men, to also lift women up. You can have them fight side by side. And that's what makes this feel disingenuous, is it is constantly all of the men are evil or they are useless, except for Arendt, who is the supreme ally, best boy. And it does this. Arendt asks her to check with the senior officer about Bosie and finds her saying that Governor Uncle is on this ship because he admires the captain, and also that they have a specific mysterious cargo on board that's taking up a bunch of space and giving them less food because of it. They need to find out what that cargo is. Now, if that's just like all of the money and all of the goods from the villages that he destroyed, that's so stupid. Like, he just snuck all of the booty on board when he could just put it in crates and move it with all of their other stuff that they were moving. Like, it's just part of a Deus Ex Machina, I swear, because it's so unnecessary. And what about the folly? They're like, you've got this mysterious stuff, but then you've also got the folly, which what the frick is the folly? There's so much going on. She meets with Kriji to regroup and to talk about what they've just learned. Leah is also with her. As much as they trust Arendt, they don't trust him enough to tell him about their plans to escape once they get to Amsterdam. Somewhat. At this point, I was like, I would not be surprised if Leah or Sarah were going to be possessed by Tom if Tom was a real figure, because there is so much resentment in Sarah and like so much desire. Not even resentment. Like, I get... she's understandably wants to get out of this situation and doesn't want her daughter to be put in the same situation that she is in, because she didn't even choose Governor Uncle. She was tricked into Governor Uncle, and then she doesn't want that for her daughter. I get it. I would not be surprised if she made wishes and prayers to old Tom to get rid of Governor Uncle. That makes sense. That's not where we're going. Sarah is investigating, and she overhears some women on the deck wondering what it's like to have a cabin, because there are poor people on this as well who were not given a cabin. They also wonder about Sarah, the governor's wife, and say that she is a wild one, say that she gets beaten by her husband sometimes, but that's what you get for being a wild one and a mess, and you freaking deserve it. And also, they put up with so much worse than getting beat by spouses, and they live in squalor, so the least that she can do is put up with being beat by her husband. She's the lucky ones. And again, that feels like a talking point, like, because this doesn't do anything. This doesn't mean anything. It's just like a passing comment that feels like it's trying too hard for a narrative from the author to talk to the reader about morals. Sarah huffs and keeps on going, determined that the leper did in fact climb right up to her window. She's definitely being targeted by this thing, and there is definitely something in her heart for the devil to cling to. Also to note in this is that they learned that the necklace that the guy was wearing earlier, that Lamb was wearing, is the same necklace that the leper was wearing, and they called this a sailor's agreement or a sailor's marriage, ship married, there we go. Where basically if one of them dies, the other one gets their stuff, and you need to be careful with who you ship marry because you don't want the other guy to murder you for your things. And it also says they sometimes share bunks, but not always. The ship marriage, not these two specifically. Nobody knows. Nobody talks about that. Returning to Errant, he still doesn't believe who his uncle has become. He'd seen men in the army do what his uncle talked about and destroyed them as men. Errant talks with some of the crew, trying to get answers, but they won't speak with him, and he ends up making a deal with Johannes Wick to fight against him. Because Errant is so big and a military guy, it would give Wick hella cred to take him down, and the constable says that he is going to bet against Errant because he doubts that anybody else will, and so that means that the constable will walk home with a bunch of money, and Johannes Wick will walk home with the pride and the honor and of his crew. Wick then agrees to do this for exchange and then if Errant loses, then Wick will share information about Bosie, and that includes the magic word that Bosie was saying from atop his pyre. The crew is then looking at the handprints, all summoned by Sarah. Governor Uncle sends Sarah to her room before talking to the crew about what they'll do from now on. From here, she eavesdrops on her husband, speaking to the others, quote, "Do you know the problem with summoning the devil, boss?" he said at last. Sarah's breath lodged in her throat. "I can imagine one or two, sir," he responded dryly. "They get loose," her husband sighed, troubled. "Old Tom made me into the man I am." Sarah had to cover her mouth to stifle a gasp of shock. "And now it appears that somebody else on this ship has brought it aboard. The question is, who's behind it? And what do they want?" "Everything is occurring exactly as it did 30 years ago, my lord. I would suggest a bargain will be offered soon. For our part, we must anticipate what it'll demand and what we are willing to pay. I prefer not to pay at all. It's been a long time since anybody forced me to do anything. Did you assemble the names I asked for?" "As far as I could remember them. It's been some time since we set old Tom loose. They're on your desk, though." "If I might be so bold, what is it, boss?" "There appears, if I may say, one obvious candidate." "Errant," supplied the Governor-General. "It can't be a coincidence that the mark appeared when he returned. I understand the implications, though I struggle to see the reason. Perhaps he finally remembers what happened to him in the forest, and why the mark of old Tom now scars his wrist. Perhaps, my lord, he knows what price you had to pay to summon your demon." Okay, so if dude is already promised to old Tom and is a soldier to old Tom, then why is old Tom, unless old Tom is coming to collect on all of the souls that had promised to him. But the whole thing here is you're going to promise your allegiance to old Tom, and if you don't by the end of day 3, then you're going to get slaughtered by the army of old Tom. So if dude is already part of old Tom's army, why would old Tom come here and slaughter him? Wouldn't dude right here be like, "Good, let my good for nothing, my overly moralistic nephew become like me"? Does he feel indentured to old Tom? Does he feel glad? Because when he was talking to freaking Errant earlier, he didn't seem to be bothered by what he had become. Maybe it's because Sarah was there. Not showing any remorse here. So I don't know why he's suddenly like, well, we should care about old Tom. Turn the boat around. You're a day out. Go back. Batavia's right there. You can see it. The guard captain, with the crewmen talking to them, eventually says that a storm is probably coming, though others disagree. The storm is like a day away. When Lamb departs, he drops something and it's a necklace. Looks like a bat wing. Oh, probably relates to the description of old Tom. Sarah is talking to Isabel about how might old Tom be summoned. Quote, to summon old Tom, 3 things are required: the blood of a loved one spilled onto a blade, the blood used to sacrifice somebody hated, and a dark prayer read aloud to honor before the body cools. Sarah blew out a breath, ruffling the corner of the page. Errant's father must have been the hated one, she thought. He was the only one who had died in the forest. Errant must have been the loved one, she continued reading. Once summoned and bound, old Tom is compelled to offer a boon in return for his freedom. He will bargain, wheedle, and deceive, but those who see through his tricks can ask for anything. The price is knowing that they are releasing a terrible evil onto the world to wreak havoc as it pleases, something that they will pay dearly for come Judgment Day. Once this initial boon is granted, the summoner must pay a tithe for the further favors. The cost is usually high. Old Tom does not like being made to look foolish. So dude's got a lot of money, so I don't see why it's coming for him. Judgment Day usually implies when you die, God is going to be like, why did you freaking summon a demon? Bad, going to hell. That's usually what it means. But then, you've got Governor Uncle, who summoned this thing. You've got what's-her-face, Isabel, saying that her husband, Peter, was being tracked by old Tom. And so now it's hunting her. And you've got them being like, well, it's going to go after Errant because he is the goodest boy and has reason to make a deal. But also you have to spill innocent blood or blood of somebody that you hate. Who do they think that Errant is going to kill? After discussing this, Sarah goes off to find Errant to tell him what she knows about him and to help him. The two investigate, and even though Errant warns her against it, she's still suspicious that he might be old Tom's guy because he didn't even mention the curse that he was involved in. But she also knows for sure that her husband was the one who summoned old Tom way back when and used Errant to do it. She asks him how he feels about being a soldier in his background, to which we get, quote, do you ever miss it? Being used as a target practice? War. He shook his head, watching the darkness cautiously. Nobody misses war, Sarah. It would be like missing the clap. What about the glory, the honor? Your deeds at the Battle of Breda are mostly lies. He sounded angry. There's no glory except what the minstrels make up so the nobles can feel good about the slaughter they paid for. A soldier's job is to end up dead from far from home, fighting for a king who wouldn't give them the crumbs from his table. Then why do it? I needed a job. I left home without stopping to think about what would happen next. Then there was just one thing after another until I was in the mud and blood. I tried being a clerk, but my grandfather kept finding me, so I went looking for work with no connections back to him. But what did I know of the world I went into? Until the first winter on my own, I'd never been cold, not really. Never been hungry. Never even had to fetch my own food. I took the first coin somebody would pay me, which was thief-taking work. I like how we're just going from, like, killing people to stealing from people, and that's an upgrade. No honest work here. He never enjoyed it, but when he's being forced into doing it just to survive, whatever. In thief-taking, quote, I've been thief-taking for a year when I was sent to collect a debt owed by an Englishman named Patrick Hayes, said Errant. He ambushed me and I killed him. I didn't mean to, but he examined his huge scarred hands. My strength gets away from me when my temper is up. Is that why your temper is never up? You've never seen me try to play the Ballad of Samuel Pepys on my fiddle. Whichever bard came up with that must have had 19 fingers. Why did you take his name? The bard? Hayes, she sighed. The man you killed? Shame. He glanced at her over his shoulder. I wanted something to remind me how it felt to kill a man. Did it work? Still think of him now. Oily water fell from the distant ceiling and plinked against the lantern. I thought that would be enough. I thought all I had to do was feel guilty and promise never to take another life, and that the world, and that would be it. Only thing is, Hayes had brothers, so they came for revenge. They had friends, and the friends had brothers. Nobody ever tells you that if you take a single life, you have to murder the mob who'd follow after. The quantity of his regret made her feel foolish for suspecting him. Thing about grief is that every death makes the pile lighter, he said, peering around the corner. 1 death is heavier than 10, and 100 are weightless. By the time I've killed everybody who tried to kill me, mercenary work seemed an obvious way to make a coin. After I rescued my uncle at Breda, he bought my commission so I didn't have to fight in the melee anymore. Then Sammy came calling, he smiled. The truth about Sammy is, once the web's unpicked, he couldn't care less where the spiders scurry off to. Unfortunately for him, his clients rarely felt the same. He hired me to do the chasing and fighting that he didn't want to do. So previously he said, like, he wanted to go and live in a world of kindness and niceness and empathy, and that Sammy was his hero for that. But here he's like, Sammy doesn't really care about people. He just, like, wants to unravel the secrets, and then he's ready to move on. Also, he renamed himself Hayes after killing this random guy, but he was also a soldier who killed people at war. It wasn't like Hayes was the first person he ever killed. And yet he forgot what it felt like and wanted to name himself after a guy that he killed so he didn't forget what it felt like when he'd done it a million times, and it's one of the reasons he wanted to get out of the war. Am I misreading this? He explains how and why he works with Sammy Pip now. Quote, because it's righteous work, he replied, baffled by the question. Sammy puts right wrongs others wouldn't bother with and wouldn't see. Doesn't matter if you're a pauper who lost 2 coins or a noble whose children disappeared from their beds. If the case is interesting, Sammy will investigate. Imagine if there were more people like that. Imagine if everybody had somebody to help them when the bad things happened. He sounded wistful, conjuring an entire world through yearning in his voice. My grandfather saw most people as disposable, there to be used and tossed away in the pursuit of ever more wealth and even more power. Nobody ever stood up to them or protected them. If you ever weren't rich and you weren't strong, he believed you had to take whatever unjustness life saw fit to mete out. I hated that about him, and I truly hate that he was right. So now Sammy helps everybody, not just like the interesting cases, even though he kind of just goes. So Sammy is just like this weird holier than thou, and also Errant again positions himself to be morally superior to everybody by saying the only job that I do is because I am morally superior, that I have picked somebody who I believe is a morally superior employer to work for, even though that won't really affect anything later if he thinks that Sammy is a spy. Because Sammy is in jail. And so, I mean, he could be like, I don't think that Sammy did anything wrong, though. I believe in my heart of hearts that I know this person. But now he is calling his uncle governor a liar. And you'd think that that would be, or, you'd think that he would be arguing with Governor Uncle that there is some misunderstanding because he knows Sammy's character. But we don't see that character conflict, which should be there. It should be a major thing here of this that, especially knowing that he now has an anger, you could have that character conflict between Governor Uncle about Sammy's characterization, especially because he's running into his Governor Uncle, not acting the way that he was when he grew up, and then having to restrain his anger so that he doesn't kill his Governor Uncle, because clearly that's also a character flaw. But it's such a useless character flaw because it doesn't come up in this book. It's just for the speaking. We never see it. They run into Lerm on their way out, and they press him for information, but he won't talk to them because the choice of the matter is the crew is bad people, and siding with a soldier would get him killed on land once they got there. So Errant, he is picking loyalty to the criminals that are his coworkers, and he leaves. Sarah and Errant remain behind and keep looking around the cargo, finding eventually some crates that had been moved and assuming that Larm had been down here to move things around. If Bro was hiding something, he sure got out of there hella fast. Errant goes to Governor Uncle for some information about old Tom, but Uncle won't say anything. He says that Errant's father thought that Errant was the devil and planned to kill him out in the woods. Grandpa and Uncle didn't want to die, so they had worked together to kill Daddy before he could kill Errant. Errant again asks about summoning old Tom, and Uncle says, do you believe in demons? Errant says no, and Uncle is like, then why do you even care? You're not here because of a demon. but because of your own choices. Quote, if you don't believe in something, how could it be summoned? You're asking me this question because your life changed in that forest and you want to know what caused that change. I'll tell you this, every decision that led you here is your own, not mine, not your grandfather's, not God's or old Tom's. Believe me, we both wished that otherwise, but you always went your own way. So he summoned old Tom and is now telling Errant that Errant is the one behind his own actions. I mean, sure, dude over here is also gonna be like, look, I'm the one that summoned old Tom. I am responsible for that, that's for sure. So okay, I can accept that. I can believe that. However, this family is just all bad. His dad wanted to murder him. His uncle is a bad person. His grandfather was a bad person. They're all just bad people. Still, Errant insists for answers on old Tom when you'd think that he wouldn't be. You know, maybe because uncle won't share and because he doesn't believe. Quote, why is this still happening, uncle? Who's behind it? Why is that demon's mark on the sail? Because I wanted more than was offered. The rest I've trusted you to uncover on my behalf. He paused. Do you believe that I love you, Errant? Errant spoke without hesitation. Yes? The Governor General puffed out his chest. Then know that I keep my secrets to protect you, not from doubt or fear. I trust you above anybody else on this ship. I'm proud of what you've become. I don't even know what Governor Uncle is doing right now. Like, again, this is why I feel, one, I need other people to read this to like tell me, am I just dumb? Like, what is happening right now? This is the kind of thing that makes me feel too incompetent to read. And then I'm like, should I even share this? Because I'm such an idiot. I can't read this stupid book. But he's like, okay, I don't believe in Tom. But he's like, I need you to solve this. I need you to get behind who is this demon. Where did this demon come from that he summoned? But he's like, I don't believe in this demon. And he is like, you need to find this demon. And also, do you trust me? Do you think I love you? Yes. Okay, now solve this for me. I'm not telling you everything because I love you and I think that you'll solve it on my behalf. Do you want to solve this or not? Does this man think that he is in danger or not? I don't know what the stakes are anymore because we're just kind of bouncing around and I don't know what anybody freaking believes. Is it just me? Errant returns to his lodgings where Drecht is drinking and they ask questions back and forth and it feels an awful lot like nothing is happening but 20 questions just to monologue about how much better Sammy is than everybody. Quote, Sammy was what Errant hoped the entire world could be. If an old woman was wronged, she should have recompense. Whether she was rich or poor, strong or weak, the weak shouldn't have to fear the powerful, and the power shouldn't simply take what they wanted without consequence. Power should be a burden, not a shield. It should be used to everybody's betterment, not merely for the person who wielded it. Errant shook his head. He hated it when his thoughts fell down this hole. It made him maudlin. He'd lived too long and traveled too far to believe in his hearth tales. But while Sammy was alive, kings and nobles had somebody to fear. That was a comforting idea. Errant, why don't you just go around killing people that you believe think that they are better than everybody else? That's obviously what you want to do with your time. And then this question answer session ends with this super on the nose quote. He lifted his sword so that he could peer along the edge. Sunlight danced on the blade. Did my uncle give you that? Asked Errant. Reward for my loyalty these past few years. Drecht's eyes narrowed, coming at last to the point of the visit. Your uncle is powerful, and powerful men have more enemies than friends. One in particular, I think. Who? I don't know, but whoever it is, he's been afraid of them for a long time. Got so he stopped leaving the fort. That's the reason every member of its household guard is traveling on the boat instead of the handful who would actually fit. He's terrified of something, the kind of terror even high walls and a company of soldiers doesn't fix. Now tell me, what could do that? Old Tom? Guessed Errant. Drecht grunted, then went back to buffing his sword. Sarah, Creasy, and Leah are together while Sarah thinks about what old Tom might have on Governor Uncle and how much trouble he might be in. I don't know, it's a demon. If this is a demon, if you are superstitious, then Tom has damnation, eternal damnation on frickin' Governor Uncle. If every act of brutality he has ever committed was at the behest of satiating old Tom's hunger for violence, and then she determines to ask her daughter Leah to make a model of the ship to guess where all of the secret passages and secret cargo might be because she is so clever that she could obviously just make a for real model of the entire ship without ever having actually walked around it, and then kind of guess where all of the rooms would be. Time passes, nothing found of the leper. Sarah goes to Governor Uncle's room for wife duties. He says that he knows that she's running around with Errant and assumes that he's cheated on her. She'll see him no more, he demands. Then he has her undress and they have sex, him saying that she can stop doing this as soon as she gives him a son. She also gives him a little bit of poison at this time. Well, technically, she's got like a sleeping drug and she's sitting there making his wine to get through everything. And she's like, well, 1 drop will put him to sleep for this many hours. 2 drops will put him to sleep for like 2 days. 3 drops, 4 drops, 5 drops, he could never wake up. And she thinks about killing him, but then she's like, it would be too obvious that I killed him. And then I couldn't take care of my daughter because they would kill me. So I have to not kill him. I don't know why we're here. Like a red herring. I say I don't know why we're here. It's a red herring. It's a very on the nose red herring that's never going to turn into anything, that you don't see it in any other situation. And again, she talks out against him too much for me. We get to another group scene where people are talking about stuff that doesn't matter too much, and the captain tells the mistress that he's a born seaman. Errant is talking to Van Schooten about the ship likely sinking and asking a dude at what cost would he trade for his wishes, which leads Errant into another self-righteous internal rant. Quote, Van Schooten laughed, pulling at his soiled clothing as if seeing it for the first time. I hate this company, you know. Always have. Profit comes before principle, pride, and people. My mama would have been ashamed to see me now. Would have been ashamed of what I'd done. Errant was surprised to find a common ground between them. His father would have been the same. He thought. Every Sunday at Mass, he railed against the United East India Company, calling the company of want. It was his belief that everything needed by mankind had been freely given by God. Food hung on trees, grew in the soil, and skipped through the forest. God's bounty given to them by birthright. It was the devil brought want. He preached, tempting people with flipperies, sugar, tobacco, alcohol, things that distracted them, that disappeared too quickly, that always needed replacing, things to go mad chasing. In the United East India Company, he saw the devil's hands at work, caging humanity with want, persuading them to buy their manacles new every month. Arendt hated his father, but he ended up half agreeing with the mad old bastard. He'd seen farmers work themselves to death in the fields because they'd paid a pittance for what they'd produced. I don't get how this works with who Aaron's father has shown us to be. Like, his father was also brutal. I don't see where his father was like, nah, wanting things makes you evil, because his father was also a highly up there man who also lacked any compassion. Quote, those who refused were forced. Those who stood in the way were murdered because progress demanded sacrifice. Van Schooten was right. People didn't matter to the company. They were commodities like everything else, free to produce and cheap to replace. Only what they dug out of the ground had value. I feel like this book is constantly just lecturing me. I swear. This is not natural. It is just fourth wall breaking, finger wagging. That's... Before anything can come of this conversation, Lerm shows up and warns them all of the 8th lantern that is back, which warned them of the ship the last time it showed out, the ghost ship, assuming that this is a sign of attack. Errant meets with Sammy so that he can poop off the side of the ship again, and also gives Errant some more hints. Sammy is really freaking just a plot device for Errant to just bring information at the end of the day so Sammy can tell him what to do next, and the whole Sammy being only available at certain times is just to slow down the investigation arbitrarily. Talking with Sammy, after talking with Sammy, there are evening drinks going around when somebody screams, and it turns out that all of the animals on board have been slaughtered. This is the first of Old Tom's signs meant to scare people into making deals with him. No more than 3 will come, and anyone who does not make a deal with Tom is to be slaughtered on the 4th appearance of Tom. They're investigating the stable area for signs of whoever might have attacked and find a rosary. Errant says that's a rosary that belonged to his father. Mistress Krigi is met by Voss in the hallway, who asks her to marry him because she is so freaking gorgeous that everyone falls for her except for guard Captain Drecht, who has always been faithful to his wife. Krigi worries that Governor Uncle might not be too much of a fan of this arrangement since she is his mistress, and Voss is like, well, you don't need to come up with an answer now, but just consider it and you can be away from him once we reach land. And she says she will think about it. Then she slips into Governor Uncle's room because she usually sleeps with him at night since Sarah doesn't, and he doesn't like to sleep alone. However, he's out cold when he is sleeping because of drugs. So Creasy starts going through Governor Uncle's things since Sarah had asked her to, until she finds a piece of parchment strapped behind Governor Uncle's breastplate. Old Tom be visiting people in their sleep, whispering to them, talking to them about what it is that they want, trying to get them to make deals, and Sarah and Creasy are both told to kill Governor Uncle with a dagger that is hidden under his bunk. Creasy is upset because this threat is kill him to save her children. This doesn't sound so much like making a deal as it is a threat. Sarah and Creasy are both confused as to why old Tom would want Governor Uncle dead if he's the one who summoned him. I don't know. There's just a lot going on. Then the fight with Wick is set up because Wick has... then we return to, where Wick and Errant were supposed to fight each other. Well, in order to set that up so it didn't look suspicious or anything, they needed a gentleman's argument, so Wick shit in Errant's bed. So Errant is like, excuse me, I want to fight you now. It's time. Wick convinces Errant to let him use swords in their fight. Errant's not sure about this, but he agrees. Sarah goes off to find Errant and ask him for help in finding Sander, as well as giving him the letter that Creasy had gotten from Governor Uncle that says Sammy is in jail for being a British spy. Errant doesn't believe this, but says that he will ask. And once we're back in her room, Sarah is asking for assistance to make her disguise. The assistant also asks Sarah if she has feelings for Errant, and she admits that she does, though she knows that it is an impossible situation. This whole thing with feelings for Errant is kind of obnoxious and unnecessary and doesn't do anything in the story. I get that she might have feelings for the first man that is actually kind to her in 15 years, but it is so unnecessary to this story in any sort of way. Randomly, the head merchant comes in on the ladies and adjusts his underwear and says that old Tom was listening to him last night. They probe him about the secret cargo that he brought on board, and he pokes at Sarah for running around secretly with Errant Hayes. However, before he can creep any further on the women, because he's leering at them the entire time he's in there, and he's like, I know secrets about you that could get you in trouble, and so, he's going to use it to try to force them into having sex with him. He's going to coerce them. Isabel says that Sander Kurz is missing, and so if Dude was the last one to see him in confession, but the merchant says that he doesn't know a damn thing about Kerr and gets out of there. Sarah, Isabel, and Creasy go over the list of names that were also affected by old Tom in the past, and there are stories of Creasy's old husband, Peter, going around killing people. She doesn't believe that, as it's not at all what her husband was like. At least to her, that's what she says. They're trying to outrun this storm, and everyone is getting resentful and paranoid and superstitious, thinking of turning on other people for the things that they want, also giving in to old Tom. This chapter felt like such an unfortunate waste of tension potential, where it is just a bunch of nameless, faceless people all thinking about what they could do, and this cast is just too big. Just more fighting of the storm, throwing the boat around into each other in the distance, and they wonder if they'll survive. There is this blurb here where it's kind of going, oh no, are we going to live? Can we possibly live? Things are so crazy. This is how men go to the devil. Cap in hand, short of hope, all their prayers gone unanswered. It's sillier because they're like, are we going to survive? What's going to happen when we're only at 40%? So we know that there is a long way to go still. They all survive the storm and eat barley stew in celebration. Drecht, Voss, and Captain Crawler go down to grab the Folly and move it onto the deck. However, the Folly seems to be gone, and only people who could have likely taken it were Governor Uncle or Voss, the men who proposed to Governor Uncle's mistress. They don't know why it was taken, but they do know how powerful the thing is and that it could make any king win in battle. They believe that they'll hear via rumors of the missing Folly who is looking for it in good time, so Arndt needs to sit around and do nothing and just listen for when rumors start moving. And now the constable is being whipped 20 lashes for the missing Folly, and Governor Uncle says that he believed somebody on the ship took it, and if somebody doesn't come forward with it, he's going to take a random person on the crew, hook them up, and lash them 20 times every day until somebody comes forward with the location of the folly. Kriji comes to check on Leah's progress of the model ship, and it's almost done. Amazing. She did this in a day, mind you. And amazing that it shows off all of these hidden places and storages that even the crew, the engineers, the boat builders had never thought of doing before, because she is just so smart. Then she shares the marriage proposal from Voss with Leah, and the two women talk about marriage as Kriji does in so very an analytical way, the pros of marrying someone who will bring status and safety, while Sarah and Leah both believe in marrying for love, but not disliking your husband. Leah says that she doesn't know if she even wants to be arranged with someone to marry when they land in Amsterdam, after all. Quote, "Oh, you truly are your mother's daughter," said Kriji, watching her affectionately. "Love can be feigned, dear heart. You can even convince yourself of it if you try hard enough, but it's impossible to spend an imaginary fortune. Marriage is an inconvenient convenience. It's a shackle we accept for our safety. Mama says that she'd rather be free than wealthy in a cage, an arrangement we frequently enjoy." Kriji snorted. "Unlike your mother, I don't believe women can be free, not while men are stronger. What use is the freedom to be assaulted in the first dark alley that we come across? We can't fight, so we sing, we dance, and we survive. Cornelius Voss adores me, and if he becomes wealthy, we could make for a fine marriage. My sons will be well educated, protected, and heirs to a future worthy of them. If I cast off that protection for some imaginary freedom, what will become of them? Where will they live? How will they eat? What will their future be? And what of myself? I'd be at the mercy of any lustful man who had the strength to put his hands on me. No, no, no. Marriage is the price that I pay for the privilege of nobility, and I consider the price well spent. Poverty is the most dangerous thing for a woman. We're not well suited for a life on the streets. But do you like being married?" "Not always," admitted Kriji, her blonde hair catching the light. Sarah comes in, kisses Leah on the forehead, immediately disappears again after snatching the model from Leah. A very bizarre interruption just to get that thing into her hands. I think this entire scene with Kriji and Leah just was to show that the boat was done already, so that it just didn't magically appear. But it's just, again, it's so heavy-handed in woman victim. All of them. Meanwhile, Kriji continues talking to Leah about her parents. Quote, "Leah smiled at the place where her mother had been. I've never seen Mama this happy. Isn't it lovely?" "It's lovely, isn't it?" agreed Kriji, who is obviously glad for the change of subject. "It's a shame. Your mother is wonderful, but she suits your father ill." "Why?" Kriji took a moment to think about it. "Because he doesn't need a partner," she said at last. "He needs a wife, and your mother doesn't need a husband. She needs a partner." "Is that why he beats her?" Kriji flinched at the coldness in Leah's voice. "I think so," admitted Kriji. "Do you believe that there are some things that can't be forgiven?" asked Leah. Kriji's face flickered as if trying to make sense of the question. "Yes," she said hollowly. "Good," said Leah. "So do I." And with that, she returned to the plans on her writing desk. With the model, Sarah and Arendt search the ship looking for the folly. Arendt guesses that Leah made the folly herself because she is such a genius. The model she made has more clever possible hiding places than the men who built the ship ever could have thought of. While searching, they don't find the folly, but they do find Sander Kurz' corpse. The guess is that Sander died on the night of the 8th candle attack, so he'd been missing and dead for some time. Then it's time for Arendt to fight Wick, and he doesn't have much hope that this isn't going to go as they had agreed, since Wick has brought knives. Wick obviously is going for the kill. However, Arendt has the upper hand during the fight and turns on the agreement as well, since Wick did first. He beats the man out. He beats the man and then makes him express what Laxagar means, which is what the leper had said which is the strange word the leper had said previously that they wanted to know what it meant. When the leper spoke in a language they all understood and only said Laxagar, I don't understand, other than, again, arbitrary forcing of the situation. Laxagar apparently means trap, and nobody knows what that means. The guard captain is like, "Why didn't you just kill him?" After the fight ends, the guard captain is there and walks away with Arendt and asks him why he didn't just kill Wick after what happened. The guard captain says, "Wick is going to come after you for what you did because you disgraced him in front of all of his men, so it would have been better to make him dead so that he doesn't come back in revenge." And Arendt is like, "Whatever, people are always coming after me anyway, so if he wants to come, then he can come, but he better do it quick and I will end him, but I wasn't going to kill him this time." Sarah and Arendt go to hide in Sarah's room with Isabel and Dorothea, who is her assistant, while Sarah heals Arendt up / patches him up with her powers / medicine because she's some sort of healer. She says that her mother was a healer and her grandfather was too, and that's how Sarah had learned. She says how her dad had married down as a merchant, and it upset a bunch of their family and friends for having gotten with some plebeian woman. She says that love nearly destroyed her family, but on the bright side, she had 5 daughters. They had 5 daughters, so her father had lots of chances to make up for that. Lerm appears and is a little pissy about Arendt's mercy being shown, but cooperates when he asks him what he'd found in the cargo hold. We find out that Lerm was the one who ordered for Bosie's tongue to be cut out, and that's because Bosie had put the boat in danger with his attempting to recruit others to do strange jobs. Lerm doesn't know what those jobs were. Lerm also says that he was protecting his home, that is this ship, from whatever mutiny it was that the leper was trying to do, and he warns Arendt to be careful of the guard captain Jacoby Drecht, who is just as brutal as Governor Uncle. Later, Sammy, Arendt, and Sarah all go over the info that they have, don't know what to do, but must stop the third curse from happening and causing more bad things. Sailors end up dead, praying for the bodies lost, and they all dump them over the side of the boat. This chapter can be described as, quote, Arendt was good at waiting. Half of everything he did for Sammy was waiting. And waiting looks a lot more like random exposition dumping to express the passage of time. Then Arendt goes to cargo and finds Voss being in something. He opens it after Voss leaves and finds a piece of the folly. He's like, I can use this to free Drecht from blame of the missing folly and punishment, and Voss can receive his dues. However, before he can do anything, he is knocked out. Arendt wakes up, tied to a beam, and Voss is writing old Tom's markings all around it, and with Arendt knowing everything, Voss is like, and then I'll just carve this symbol on you too, and when people find you, they'll think that the demon has just found you and killed you, quote, they won't even think to question it. They'll want to believe. People like stories more than they like the truth. As the man announces his plan, the leper appears out of nowhere and stabs Voss, creeps toward Arendt, and drags his bloody knife across him, only to stop after sniffing him and finding the rosary in Arendt's pocket. Then he blows out the candle and disappears. Arendt is now free and shows the woman how Voss was a thief, though he didn't have the folly on him. They're still not sure if the devil is real or not, though Voss was using old Tom for cover and Isabel and Krigi have background with the supernatural. The end of this is summarized with, quote, he laughed grimly. It's been a long day, and a lot of people have tried to kill me, he considered it. Voss may or may not have been old Tom, a demon which may or may not exist. If it exists, it was summoned by my uncle, a man I once loved, but who now seems to be a vindictive, callous, murdering bastard. Voss, whose treasures, stolen from a family old Tom destroyed nearly 30 years ago, my newest friend butchered an island full of people, and we're a solitary, unholy miracle away from everybody being slaughtered, according to a prophecy of a murdered predicant. Worst of all, the only man who could hammer a beam to this mess is locked away in the dark under false accusations from my grandfather, and there's not a damn thing I can do to help him. And then he passes out. Drecht and Governor Uncle are then talking about looking for the folly, Voss's betrayal, eventually go to the passengers' cabins after the dude like, oh, this is about the folly. The narrative keeps secrets from the reader, and I'm actually not just bored now, but I'm annoyed. And and at this point, I was not just bored, but also annoyed, because the author is purposefully keeping things from the reader with the ending of this chapter. Quote, the Governor General knocked again, then cleared his throat. It's John Hahn, he said, in a deferential tone of somebody with rugs to sell. You've been waiting for me. The door creaked open into gleam, revealing a figure seated in the corner. Its face was hidden behind a bloom of candlelight, but as he entered the cabin, he pushed it away with a long finger revealing itself. Ah, said the Governor General sorrowfully. I was right then. The door slammed shut behind him. In the ocean's darkness, the 8th lantern opened its eye. Drecht was obviously left behind. I don't know, keeping him way too close to information for someone who isn't in on whatever this is. Captain and Drecht get together to man some cannons on Governor Uncle's orders. Didn't say why. were just there. More time passes, and then Sarah with Errant as he passed out and fighting a fever infection. Sarah's with Errant after he's passed out and is fighting a fever/infection. Quote, she watched his face for any twitches, suggesting a recognition. He tried to comfort me, she continued, seeing nothing. He told me that you'd been into the dark before and found your way out. Sarah put her lips to his ear. He said that you'd called for God, and he hadn't come. He said that you'd believed that there was nothing waiting, no God or devil, no saints or sinners. He's in awe of you. He said that you're remarkable because you choose to do good rather than because you're afraid of what's waiting if you don't, like most people. She struggled for words. I don't believe heaven is empty. I think God is waiting for you, and so am I. Her hand pressed fearfully against his chest. I'm waiting for you here on a blighted ship, stalked by the devil. I can't stop alone. I need you to wake up and help me. Errant, I need you. A sound outside her porthole gets her attention. Errant also wakes up weakly. Isabel is asking Van Schuten and the captain about the devil in the dark water, the voices in the water. Quote, it's what old sailors call the soul, answered Van Schuten from the opposite end of the table. They reckon our sins lie beneath it like wrecks on the ocean bed. Dark water is our soul, and old Tom is swimming within it. Switch over to Johannes Wick, thinking about the deal that he'd made with old Tom to kill Errant in exchange for a better life for his entire family on the deck where they're gathered. The leper appears and runs at Wick with a dagger to his face. This is even more bizarre when you think that the description later is that they paid off the entire crew to whisper to people, to pretend that the boat is haunted. So that was Sammy who told people to whisper to Wick to kill Errant for his family to have a better life. Unless the dude is just hallucinating. During the insanity, or I just misread the entire ending of the book. Your choice. During the insanity, Kriji goes to check on Governor Uncle. His light is off, which is unusual, and inside she finds him dead, dagger in his chest. Errant and the captain of the ship discover Johannes's dead body. It smells of paprika. Don't know what that means. Errant is going to let Sammy out of jail because he's needed, and this has gone on long enough. Sarah and Kriji are not sad that Governor Uncle is dead, but they're trying to figure out who did it. Who was the last one in there to see him, and who could have killed him? Randomly, Leah somehow figures, quote, as she pondered it, Leah made a small, startled sound, then laughed. That is very clever, she said in amusement. Nobody listening would ever have believed her father lay murdered only a few paces from her. I think I know who father went to see, she said. Sarah and Kriji clustered around her. So she took the quill from her father's pot, then underlined the name Viscountess Dalvain of the passenger manifest and Emily de Haviland in a list of people possessed by old Tom. You see, she said, though nobody did. Dalvin is Halavand rearranged. In the guest room, Sarah finds a journal that she looks over. Quote, Sarah turned to the first page. In dark ink, it showed a grand house burning, surrounded by an angry mob who were dragging people outside and slitting their throats. In one corner, the witch-finder, Peter Fletcher, watched impassively while old Tom giggled in his ear. She turned the page. Here was a more detailed drawing of Peter Fletcher, shackled to a wall screaming. Old Tom was removing the organs from his chest and leaving them in a pile on the ground. Gagging, Sarah turned the page. This was a picture of them boarding in Batavia. Sarah, her husband, and Leah were in the quarterdeck, while Samuel, Pips, and Errant were being marched through the crowds by Drecht, stalked by old Tom, who was riding a bat-faced wolf. Her head spinning, she turned another page. Here was the Sardom at sea, surrounded by a fleet, away in the distance with the 8th lantern, except it wasn't a ship. It was old Tom holding a lantern in one hand. On the 5th page, the leper slaughtered the Sardom cattle, while old Tom danced among the bodies. On the 6th page, the leper stalked through the fog of the orlop deck, trailed by old Tom. What is it, dear heart? Asked Kriji, coming up behind her. It's a diary of everything that's happened, said Sarah in disgust, turning the page to reveal a drawing of her husband dead in his bunk with a dagger in his chest. Mama, gasped Leah, appearing behind her. This is the scene exactly. How could Delavain have known what was going to happen? Sarah's hand felt like stone, but she had to see what could come next. The Sardom was aflame, passengers clinging to the gigantic body of the old Tom as the Sardom was aflame, passengers clinging to the gigantic body of old Tom as he carried them to a nearby island. The devil was staring out at the page at Sarah, with a knowing smile on his face. It knew that she was reading the book. Opposite to the final page, the mark of old Tom floated on the ocean, the Sardom a tiny speck beneath it. Something nagged her. The marks were drawn strangely, the familiar lines broken up into rough circles of different sizes, almost like Emily had let the ink simply drip out of the quill on the parchment. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't the mark of old Tom, she realized with a mounting horror. It was a drawing of an island of Sardom was sailing towards. This was where the symbol had come from. The 3 unholy miracles had come to pass, and now old Tom was taking them home. Guys, is this a 600-year-old death note, or is this just a way to be more on the nose as the author? Finding Isabel had a deal with Wick to be taken care of once they had hit land, but they couldn't talk to each other for fear of putting each other in danger. She's not a suspect anymore of the bad things happening. Errant is told that Governor Uncle is dead, and again, they talk out the pieces of information that they have about each other. And then they talk about the new information that they found and how they need to hunt down Emily and kill her because she is probably a witch. More suspicions get thrown around and doesn't even seem like they matter. Half of the people mentioned in this chapter aren't even in this book. They're just random names that don't matter. Leah says that she invented the folly because she was just the most brilliant 8-year-old girl that's ever existed and she was bored, and it's not important to the story, but somehow it's also such a powerful weapon that it'll make any king win any battle whatsoever, and she made it, and Sammy was hired to recover it, though what the frick happened to it? Did freaking Governor Uncle sell it and then go and kill people to find it? I don't know. It just sounds like a fake reason to get these people together and then make Leah an OP. The guard captain Dract meets with Van Schuten to demand to tell him what was snuck aboard. They go to the cargo. It turns out that Governor Uncle and those hired smuggle a ton of treasure on board. Van Schuten was out here and going to get paid a lot of this so that he would never have to work on this dirty ship again. However, Dract is also interested in these treasures for what it would mean for him. Quote, "A man with this wealth would never know want again. He could have servants, a grand house, and a future for his children. Thing is, Van Schuten, it wasn't only those sailors who knew about the cargo, and it wasn't only them I was supposed to kill." The boatman Aegert, who is another random crewman who doesn't really matter, he just comes and goes as he pleases, goes to Dorothea, pleading for her to get to safety as a mutiny is coming. Captain Crowler goes to the front of the crew, saying no more miracles are going to come. Next time Tom shows up, it'll be to kill anyone who hasn't sworn allegiances. So now the time to swear allegiances has come. Pull your knife out if you dare. Many of the crew pull out their knives to swear allegiance to old Tom, and Drecht is in on it. Quote, "I want the fortune that was promised to me by the Governor General," said Drecht. "I slaughtered children in their beds so that my children could have a better future. I don't sleep anymore, Errant. I can't. And now I want what I paid so dearly to have." "And who's going to sail the ship when you have it?" demanded Sammy, covering his ears against the clash of metal. Errant and Sammy believe that they could take control of the ship, then they can take control of the crew. So Errant is going to try and do that now, though the dark water interrupts them, and the great hand drags Errant, Sammy, Alarm into the sea because the boat has crashed or shipwrecked or whatever. With the ship not fully destroyed, but messed up because somehow it is shipwrecked, but they're also going to go back onto the ship and investigate it. So it is not sunken yet, but it is shipwrecked. So I guess maybe it just hit the island, but it is, or hit some rocks near the island, because later when Sarah and Errant are investigating what's left of the ship, and specifically Governor Uncle's side of the ship, which is untouched by any damage. It didn't get any mutiny damage. It doesn't get any water damage. It wasn't damaged in the crash. It's all perfectly preserved so that they can see the murder situation that was set up. Somehow, that's all fine. So I don't really know exactly what happened with this thing to make this ship throw them all into the sea with this hand of water and then still be floating but broken. Somebody can figure that out for me. They're all on an island. Drecht is alive and likely with Sarah because he knew that it was coming due to his allegiances with Old Tom and ordered them all to get on a small ship to get out of the way before the ship went down. Sarah is working on helping those who survived along with Karishi and Leah. Sammy is not looking so hot, and Arendt is thinking over interactions with Drecht and his selfishness. Quote, Arendt felt tiredness building inside of him. It was never going to end, was it? They were never going to stop butchering each other. Jacoby Drecht hadn't even paused to wipe the blood off of his hands after the mutiny. That first night on the Sardam, the guard captain had told them he didn't believe in devils because man didn't need an excuse to commit evil. Arendt had thought it was a lament, but now he realized it was a confession. He'd simply looked inside and told them what he had found. Somehow this was unbelievably disappointing for the story. The goal now is to kill Drecht and take control of his men because Drecht is the true devil. Why? Greed. It's just greed. He was a bad man. They got on board with a bunch of bad people. It was always bad people. Trying to negotiate with Drecht, Drecht is determined that there is not enough food for everyone, so he is going to offer resources to the ones that promise him loyalty. And by resources, he also means women. Arendt says how horrible this is and tries to get Lerm on his side, though no one's got the power to fight against Drecht and his crew. Drecht still asks for Arendt's blessings for his plan because he says that'll give it more credence, and Arendt is like, no. He also demands that Sammy be put on the rescue ship that is going to be sent out with other people. It is basically a death ship because they're like, you're going to go out there looking for rescue and you're not going to find anybody and you're going to die at sea. I feel like we're having some kind of you go girl moment now, and it's really bizarre. Quote, Sarah emerged weary from a cave, staring at her fingers with a profound sense of satisfaction. 3 weeks ago, she'd boarded the Sardam, hidden so deeply under layers of etiquette and hatred that she'd almost forgotten who she was. But somewhere between the horrors of the storm and the torments of Old Tom, she discovered herself again like a dusty mirror under a shroud. Amidst all of the misery, she was as happy as she could remember being. For the last several hours, she'd practiced her healing without being told that it was beneath her station or an affront to her dignity. She'd kissed Arendt openly. She'd been able to go where she wanted and say that she wanted and let Leah be as clever as she wanted to be without having to reprimand her. None of this would be possible once they returned to Amsterdam. Guard Captain Trek had seized the plans to the Folly, leaving Sarah without anything to trade for her freedom. Leah could probably recreate it, but it would take years of work, and she wouldn't be given time. She was of marriageable age, and Sarah's father would immediately seek a good match. I don't feel like Sarah has done anything to have this, like, epiphany moment. Her husband is now dead, so now she is feeling free, I guess, but she didn't do it. She didn't participate in any of that. I guess she had a near-death experience, so now she's having a wake-up moment, but it just feels so forced. And I don't feel like Sarah has actually been important to anything. She's been side dressing with a fixation of victimhood and freedom is giving me Riley Sager vibes with the female empowerment speech that was in freaking Survive the Night, which is a review on this channel. If you haven't checked it out already, I recommend you check it out for that cringe. I also feel like this whole thing of her feeling like she can be herself again is so overspoken, because when did she ever see herself being herself in this book? She's theoretically just been hiding it the whole time, but then also she was speaking out against her husband anyway, so we didn't even see her suppressing herself. Arendt tells the women the plan that Drecht has to brutalize them all and propositions that they find some men, not the musketeers, to join their plan in fleeing. And he's going to go and see who will join them. And Sarah says, quote, "You should know, not all passengers will come with us." Arendt looks stunned. What? Why? Some of them will think Drecht's offer is fair, either because it doesn't affect them or because they think living is worth the price. I don't understand. That's because you've never had to, Sarah said, her hair blowing around her face. Don't worry. We'll try to spread the word only amongst the sympathetic. Just know that we won't be saving everyone. Again, it's this freaking... men are so bad. You've never had to know what it's like to be a woman. It's trying so hard, and it's obnoxious. This is all that Sarah is on the screen. ever. It feels like posturing. Anyway, Arendt is interested in saving whoever they can, so he goes off. He's exploring an island now. He says he's going to talk to people, but he actually just goes into the island to try to find an escape route for like when it's time to run, because he doesn't want to be surprised by anything. And he discovers like a fake camp. Oh yeah, and he's also thinking as he exploratively walks, he gets this one thought, this one singular thought for single brain cell Arendt, quote, "Loss grew like a bubble in his gut. It made no sense, he thought. He wasn't a boy anymore, and the man that he'd met in Varavia wasn't the same man who'd raised him. He'd beaten Sarah. He'd slaughtered the population of Banda Islands. He'd consorted with the devil. He'd locked Sammy in a cell, which would certainly have killed him. These were acts of a monster, and yet, deep down, Arendt still loved him. He grieved his death. Why would that be? How could that be?" That's literally the only thought that Arendt has on the death of his uncle. He never goes over like why his uncle changed, how his uncle had changed. Also, what is so bad about locking Sammy in a cell if Sammy is a freaking spy for another country that he is possibly at war with? Like, we don't know the relations of these people. But he's the devil because he locked a spy in jail. What? I know he's your friend. What? Friggin' Arendt over here wants to be, I am the holiest of the holy, but also I will sell out my people for my friend. Like, you didn't even ask your governor uncle about this situation when you discovered the truth, Arendt. We got nowhere with that. Screw you for bringing it up. Like, what the frick? Short-lived, because it moves on quickly after that, and it just seems shallow doing that. He explores and he finds a living quarters for what seems where old Tom's army might live at some point, and he discovers some decorative blade, and this place all seems fake, and this gives him a thought. Again, he gets another singular thought, giving me some Gronk moment, and he's like, okay, so there's a decorative blade, decorative knife, a knife for decorating, a fake knife, a theater knife, a show knife, a non-sharp knife, a knife you couldn't kill with because it is fake. Quote, it's a decoration. An idea came, and then another, and then another, and another. How did you kill somebody without entering their cabin? What weapon could do it? Who'd wield it? It can't be, he said out loud as the answer arrived in a dizzying rush. It can't be. And again, the chapter just ends, cutting it off to keep the reader freaking in suspense from the characters' thoughts where we're supposed to be following them. Like, I hate this stupid thing. I might not be able to read thrillers anymore because I say this. It's just a stupid thing that a bunch of thriller authors do. I know not all thriller authors do this, but this is so freaking annoying. And it's not just thriller authors that do this, but it does happen a lot because what the frick are you doing? Back to Sarah, and she is seeing off some dying men and then thinking about how much she adores Arendt. Quote, she'd never met a braver man. Not that he'd accepted her compliment. There wasn't courage in doing what was necessary, he said. She sighed. It wasn't going to be easy loving a man like that. What a weird thing to say. And then she's looking around the shore of washed up things and finds dishes, thinks why would her husband have these things and just rabbit trails into the solution because that's apparently how we're solving things now. Quote, why would her husband have this? He'd admitted to summoning old Tom. Could this have been why? To rob them? Not rob, she realized with a flash of insight. That wasn't her husband's way. What if he'd done this to these families, what he'd done to her father, Cornelius Voss, and countless others over the course of his life? Ruin them, belittle them, then leave them alive to suffer their fall. According to the Demonologica, these families had all been traders, merchants, and shipbuilders, people her husband would have needed or been in competition with while he was building his business 30 years ago. But if he summoned old Tom and set it all loose on them, Peter Fletcher had thwarted the scheme, then her husband had old Tom kill him in revenge, except a memory grew. Nail began scratching at her mind. The first time she'd seen the picture of Peter Fletcher in Creesy's cabin, she'd been bothered by it. He'd been resplendent in the beautiful clothes, standing in front of their manor house. He'd even been able to afford Creesy, the natural consort of kings. Did Peter, she panted, was he nobility? Did he come from money? Creesy laughed grimly. Witch-finders don't come from money. It was a reward for the good works from the families he'd saved. No, it wasn't, Sarah thought. Rewards were given willingly. The Governor-General had set old Tom loose on these families, destroying the reputations of these competitions and blackmailing those who could be useful to him. Then, when they agreed to his terms, he'd dispatch Peter Fletcher to banish old Tom and convince everybody the demon was really gone. Oh, but her husband left his enemies alive. He always did. He enjoyed watching them suffer, and one of them had found him. When Sarah found that book in Viscountess Dalvain's cabin, she'd believed it was a mockery of the Demonologica. But what if it had actually been a true account of what had happened in all those years ago? Old Tom had destroyed the de Havillands, leaving only Emily alive. She'd grown up seeking revenge. She would have witnessed Peter Fletcher's actions firsthand and dedicated herself to tracking him down. She had found him in Amsterdam, married to Creasy and father of 2 boys. Somehow he'd recognized her and fled, but she'd followed him to Lisle. She'd tortured him, uncovering the conspirators, and that would have led her to Sander Kerrs and the Governor-General. No wonder her husband never took off his damned breastplate. No wonder he'd hidden himself away from Batavia, surrounded by high walls and guards. How did you kill a man that was well protected? By luring him out, she thought. The predicant had received a fake letter from Peter Fletcher 2 years ago, instructing him to sail from the city. Her husband had received a fake ascension order from Aaron's grandfather a month before they boarded the Sardam. Laxagar and Norrish for trap, she muttered, eyeing the wreck again. So, yeah, she just pieced together all of that from nothing. And also, bro, why would you see that death note when people are dying and think that it was a mockery in the first place? At the very least, it was a journal. Emily had marked the sail with the mark to basically say that she had found her mark and she was coming for them because she wanted them to know. That's the assumption. In case you're wondering, no, Emily hasn't been in this story. It's not from me not mentioning it. She just hasn't been in it. This ship is apparently wrecked, but not totally wrecked, and is still above water, so Sarah and Aaron are now on it looking for clues. Also fortunate enough that despite all of the damage from the mutiny, and the wreck, the area where the governor uncle died is untouched because guards or something had been put over there during the mutiny to keep people at bay, and so all of the holes in the ship are perfectly intact. No damage has been done, and at 90% we get, quote, Aaron and Sarah spent the afternoon together, walking up and down the beach, making their plans. They held hands and spoke in a hush, frequently glancing at the Sardam. Everyone left them alone. At 90%, where is the threat? Where is the tension? Where is the urgency to deal with this? Are you not all going to die? Are the women not all imminently going to be raped? Like, what are we doing here? Your daughter is about to be molested and raped by any of these criminals on here, and any of you that do not get on board with it are going to be killed by all of the other musketeers that are serving under Drecht. What are we doing? Then they separate to do their duties as Drecht says them to. Sarah and Isabel and Creasy are sad at the way things have turned out, and Isabel wants to make sure that old Tom doesn't leave the island because all of the people are already lost to him. The dudes all be leering every time that they're mentioned. Quote, chatter was muted, each person looking fearfully at the drunken musketeers whose desires were revealed by the firelight. The passengers knew what was coming, what was always coming when the strong were given free rein over the weak. Only Isabel seemed oblivious. Well, they're all drinking and partying by the fire. Everyone gets drugged, passed out. Isabel is going to burn every last person here, Sarah included, because any of them could have been made into old Tom's servant, and she is a crazy zealot. As Isabel is about to burn everyone, starting with Leah, Creasy admits that she made up old Tom because she wanted to kill the governor uncle. Is that because Governor Uncle used old Tom to get money from places? So then now she used old Tom on Governor Uncle, being familiar with it since her family was ravaged by this? We'll get there. But she was a victim of Governor Uncle's tactics, which is why she wanted to kill Governor Uncle and Peter Fletcher, because of their whole dealio they did together. Anyway, tied up, Creasy explains that she didn't mean for the mutiny to happen. She only wanted to kill Governor Uncle. You know, if this whole thing was just to murder Governor Uncle and Sander Kerrs, or Peter Fletcher, whatever. If this whole thing was just to kill Governor Uncle, this was a very complicated way with a lot of moving pieces that didn't promise safety or that you'd get stuff done, especially when it's an 8-month journey with pirates and criminals crew members. Anyway, quote, "No, that was never the intent. Do you think I'd have brought my own boys aboard if I'd thought to do the ship harm? Old Tom was all theater, just a shadow playing on the walls. There was never supposed to be a mutiny or a shipwreck. I planned it so carefully. Sarah Crowells was paid to sail us there, then disembark everybody by claiming that he needed to thoroughly search the ship for Emily de Havilland. I assumed everybody would be so afraid that they'd agree willingly. This island isn't dangerous. It doesn't really resemble the mark of the old Tom. That was just to convince any last doubters that the demon was real and had killed Jan Han. There are supplies here, and the Luerdin was going to stumble upon us in days or so. It would have taken everybody back to Amsterdam, leaving Crowell's and skeleton crew to unload treasures, minus his payment. Once that was done, they were supposed to sail the Sardin back safely, delivering the cargo and appeasing the Gentleman 17. The only people who were supposed to get hurt were Jan Han and Sander Kurz." Hatred seethed in every word. "I didn't know that Johannes Wick would be aboard, and I didn't expect Crowell to betray me. He wanted the treasure and the folly for himself, and he thought that he could get them by inciting his crew to kill the nobles, including me. Believe me, old Tom was for your husband's benefit alone. Maybe you shouldn't have gotten on a ship with a bunch of bad guys, with a bunch of criminals who prefer themselves over the nobles, who have brutalized everybody that nobody would feel bad about killing because they're all terrible people." She says she thought about this so carefully. It does not feel that careful at all. What about this? And she brought her children on a ship full of criminals, full of bloodthirsty, bad people. And she says, well, I wouldn't bring them if it wasn't dangerous, if it was dangerous. This is me pushing the doubt button. She further explains that she threw out the rosary that belonged to Aaron's father that had been in his pocket. Quote, "I threw it away. It was among Peter's possessions. Your uncle hired Peter to kill your father, and your grandfather asked for the rosary as proof that he'd completed his contract. Once he'd seen it, Caspar ordered Peter to destroy it, but he kept it for some reason, a trophy perhaps. It wasn't left in the animal's pens to hurt you, Arent." There was a throb in her throat. "I wanted Jan Han to know why this was happening to him. The assassination of your father is what started everything. When Peter stabbed him, you leapt at Peter with an arrow, and he had to half drown you in the stream to keep you from killing him. Peter was so badly injured, it was all that he could do to drag himself away. He was afraid of you. That's why he left you in the woods alone. A jagged rock made that scar on your wrists as you thrashed in the water. It shouldn't have led to anything, but you drew it on some doors in the village, and when Jan saw the chaos that it caused, he realized that he had a way to make himself a fortune. He brought the scheme to Caspar den von Berg and Peter. Caspar provided the necessary funds, and Peter spun a tale of possession and ritual out of it, and using his fellow witch-finders to terrorize the lands of those Jan sent him after. Together, they drove their competitors out of business, including my family." "Your family?" queried Drecht, still tied to a rock. "Krigi Jens was born Emily de Havilland," said Sarah, examining every twitch of Krigi's face, trying to find the woman within. For the past 2 years, she had looked on those features with love, thinking that she knew every thought that lay behind them. Now she realized how foolish she'd been. She'd been used and betrayed. This entire section is just interrogating Krigi to explain everything. All of the sounds and whatever happened of how they made old Tom exist on the ship and have the whatever, with Leah acting like an overexcited, impatient mystery gang extra. And it feels so lazy. Quote, "I might disagree. How did you come to be my father's mistress? I'm assuming it wasn't a coincidence," Leah disagreed irritably. "Without family, I had no wealth or influence, so I had to rely on my beauty. My first husband was a holy terror, but I used his wealth to hunt down the witchfinder. Once I found him, I left my husband and reinvented myself as a courtesan. I seduced Peter, intending to kill him when I had found the opportunity, but I fell in love with him. He'd given up his work, and he was kind and generous, and he had made me feel like somebody new. I allowed myself to believe that he had changed, that I had changed. Then our funds grew short, and he started talking of a scheme that he'd used to make himself rich. He sent a missive to Aaron's grandfather, and I knew that he was going to start again. He was planning to destroy more families the way that he had destroyed mine. I called an old friend who tortured Peter for the names of his associates. We then set out on our vengeance. and that brought you to my husband. I met your husband years earlier through Peter, and knew that he had an eye for me. After I killed Peter, I wrote to him and professed an adoration. He had me on the first boat to Batavia. Then why wait? Why not kill him when you arrived 2 years ago? Because I would have been caught, and I loved my boys, and now you and Leah, far too much to be parted from you. I needed to wait for the right moment. Lerm then appears and says that old Tom wants to see them, and he is hiding in a pin beneath the animal area on the boat. It turns out that Sammy and Creasy are brother and sister and worked on this together, and they spend the time praising Arendt for solving the case like this was a game, and also as if he solved it when he actually didn't. It was Sarah that solved it, and by that I mean not really, because the zealot kind of pushed them, and then Leah was like, oh yeah, that was also a setup just to make you confess, because I had to make sure that you were actually the one that killed my husband, and so now that you're screaming that you did it, I can call off Isabel, and she's not going to kill us all, because she's not actually crazy. Quote, Sammy became abashed. I spent 3 weeks in that stinking darkness. I thought I deserved a little comfort. You can't imagine my surprise when Lamb turned up at my door, bold as brass, and told me Arendt knew everything and I should blow up the 8th lantern if our friendship held. The problematary beamed at Arendt like a proud parent. I knew that you'd work it out. You did most of it, Arendt grunted, ashamed of the praise. A few hints here and there, scoffed Sammy, waving him away. It's only your second case. I wanted you to enjoy it. People are dead, Sarah said sharply, annoyed by how flippant he was. That's how most of our cases start and end, said Sammy, baffled by the objection. If it was any consolation, everybody who died deserved it, apart from the people who died in the wreck, but that was Crowell's fault for ignoring the plan. He ran the back of his fingers down his scarred face, and I think that you'll agree I've been punished for my misjudgment. He's like, don't worry, only people who deserved it died, well, except for those other people that, weren't supposed to die, but, dude, you killed them. You made this too complicated to kill one dude and killed a bunch of other people because you involved people that didn't know, that didn't need to be a part of this because of your pride. It is the Sammy strangling hour is what this is. Sarah is listening to all of this and is also outraged. Quote, if you hated my husband so much, surely you could have found a simpler way of killing him. What would be the fun in that? Wondered Sammy, confounded. Look, I'm not a violent person. Sammy just killed a bunch of people because regular murder was too boring. It's such a stupid reason. Why is this book existing? Well, because it would have been too boring to just stab him and push him off a bridge, to feed him to wild boars or alligators, to sell him. They even talk about how they acted recklessly because they wanted their target to know what was happening, and it all just worked out. Other things to note, they say how this whole thing cost them nothing because there was another random name thrown in here during this description in a case where Sammy was involved, and the dude was super rich. And Sammy argued for this guy's innocence. The guy was accused of being a thief of this very expensive diamond, and he's like, well, I found out that the guy was innocent, but actually he wasn't innocent. He did steal the diamond, but I am such a good detective, and by detective I mean a freaking liar, that I got him off. And then he sold the diamond. No, and then he gave Creasy the diamond because Creasy is such a dang hottie that her hotness is used as a plot device so that we can pay for this murder party game because regular murder is too boring. So we used the money from that diamond to pay off all of the sailors on this crew so that they would whisper at you in the middle of the night, making you think that old Tom was talking to you, when really it was just all of these scallywaggers going, you want to kill some people? I'll make your dreams come true if you just worship me. Kill some people. Just do it. You want to do it? Please do it. And we just hired the entire crew to do this. And then if there was somebody that they were not talking to, then they pretended to be talked to because they were a part of the crew. They're all invited to, Sarah and Arendt are invited to sit down and eat, and everything is fine and happy, and Sammy hired Arendt in hopes that he would get closer to Governor Uncle because he hoped that Arendt was a bad person, but it turns out that Arendt is actually one of the only good men in existence, and actually a good man, and so he didn't get to use him to kill Uncle Governor, and had to do this the hard way. Sammy's charges were faked. The letter was real because they followed Governor Uncle, but needed an excuse for Sammy to not be involved in the mystery because he's like, well, if I was available to solve the mystery And then I was like, I'm so stumped. This is really hard. Then y'all would have been very suspicious of me from the start, so I needed a way to myself out of here, which was putting myself in the brig with a fake letter. Quote, "How long have you been doing this?" asked Arendt, his voice cracking. "Committing crimes?" Sarah could hear the rage barely controlled. She sought out his hand under the table, but his fists were clenched. "I was planning murders long before I was solving them," admitted Sammy. "My family's name was destroyed, and we had nobody to support us. Emily and I survived however we could, and it turns out more people want somebody dead than care who killed them. I could tell you I carried on doing it because I was poor and starving, but I've lied enough for today. My gifts demand exercise, and the only thing more thrilling than unraveling a complicated murder is plotting one, then seeing it come off so perfectly that nobody even recognizes that it was a crime. Kings die peacefully in their beds. Nobles fall off their horses while hunting. Beautiful heiresses commit suicide at balls. Good mysteries so rarely come along. But if you've got a little imagination, you can invent as many as you want. It proved a lucrative venture over the years. I've exported them to France, Germany, the Cape. They're my spices, but unlike sugar and paprika, the nobility will never get sick of murdering each other." Why did he do this one so complicated then? "You really are old Tom," said Arendt hollowly. "There's no such thing as demons, Arendt." Sammy took a sip of wine, the liquid reddening his lips. "But there are always bargains to be struck." I hate these people. I hate these people. I hate that this is the final chapter where they're just like, yeah, we all suck. Fuck you. Quote, "I told you earlier that we did all of this because we wanted Jan Han to know our fear. But we also did it because we didn't want to be caught. Everybody on that island believes a demon killed your husband, which is exactly what we intended. That's the story they'll go back home and tell." Seeing Sarah's doubt, she waved a hand. "All of this we can explain away, but superstition burrows itself deep. They believe it now. They believe in old Tom. They'll spend their lives cursing him for things that all go wrong in their lives and rubbing charms to keep themselves safe. Their children will believe, and so will their grandchildren." She paused, gathering herself. "I love you, Sarah." Her eyes found Leah. "I love you, Leah. My boys love you. I want you to come with me to France as we planned. We have Jan's treasure, which means that we can live a life we always talked about, free of any obligation to marry. She's like, we can be Thelma and Louise now." Aaron tries to protest this as terrible, but he's told that he is the bad one for caring that bad people died. Quote, "Whatever your intentions, hundreds of people are dead," growled Arendt. "Children have lost their mothers and fathers. Husbands have lost their wives. You can't walk away from that. Somebody has to be held to account." He stared at Sammy fiercely. "That's what we did, Sammy. We held people to account for doing things like this." "Your uncle was held to account," said Karishi, "and my conscience aches for the hurt that we've done accomplishing that, but it's a surge by the knowledge that we prevented the Gentleman 17 from taking control of the Folly, and through that expanding an empire which empowers ruthless men like Jan Han." "Until you sell it to somebody else," argued Arendt. "We've destroyed it," said Sammy flatly, "or at least the two parts that we recovered. The Folly was much too powerful for any king or company to possess." And it comes back to the Folly of which was made by Leah in the first place. Why? Because she's a genius? For what point was the Folly made? It doesn't even matter. It played no part in this stupid story. They had all of the money from all of the other crap that they stole. What was the point of the Folly? Oh my gosh. Sammy and Kriji offer Sarah the decision. Arendt doesn't get to make the decision, BT Dobbs. Sarah gets the decision to let this be. They can come to France and they can live, or they can go stay on the island where there are plenty of supplies for them to live on, live comfortably, just live outside society, whatever. But you can't go back and to Batavia, and you can't go live out on your own somewhere else because you would be a liability to the scheme that these two people are running. And Sarah is like, well, I don't want to do either of those two things because I'm very uncomfortable with this. Arendt is uncomfortable with this because obviously Arendt is upset by you guys killing a bunch of people. Can we do a third option? And Sammy is like, didn't offer you a third option. And Karishi is like, what's your third option, sweetie? Because obviously us girls got to stick together. So then Sarah offers, how about instead of living quietly in France, they all become vigilantes And he uses his power to target the evil rich people, to just keep killing evil rich people specifically. And then Kirigi is like, because, rich people don't ever face justice. And so then Kirigi is like, then maybe it's time for the devil did what God will not do, said Kirigi gaily. She turned her inquisitive stare onto Sarah. Shall we begin? Basically, we're police, judge, and executioner, and we'll end people that we determine are corrupt enough that we get to determine. Lol. So that's the devil and the dark water. Let's get through the final notes here. Character, none of them mattered. They're all tools. Sammy is a freaking hint box to bop and discover. Well, he's just really the one in charge of this whole thing the entire time. It's just like everything he says is a lie. Whatever. He's not important. He just shows up for the majority of the book when he comes out of the jail to poop over the side of the ship and to answer Aaron's questions and push him in a direction. And then at the end be like, ha, ha, ha. Ha. Governor Uncle doesn't use him despite the guy being a prisoner, despite that he probably should have used him, though I guess if he's a spy, then you're like, I'm not going to trust you, but you should still threaten him, have a gun at him, something. Aaron was the bestest boy who never did any wrong, who constantly talked about how much better he was than everybody, how much nicer he was than everybody. Sarah was the sage boat wife who still wanted to be free from her husband and was just a victim. Sanders was useless. Kirigi was the super hot plot device that got everything she wanted because she was super hot. And every other male was useless, gross, and or a criminal. And Leah was a super genius daughter who created a folly that everyone wanted so that they could become an OP nation and murder everybody. There were so many characters and none of them mattered. On top of that, you at least had the question of what happened to Governor Uncle between Aaron's childhood and the marriage, and he never rectified that change or who his uncle had become, or if he had always had rose-colored glasses on who his uncle was and only saw his uncle for who he was when he had gone off to war and seen the brutality of man. There are some strong questions here, but none of them were looked into, which is bizarre when this piece suggests the devil inside of man. Constantly. That is the theme of this book. Constantly. And randomly, Aaron started going on about old Tom is a demon rather than sticking to his non-belief, his more logical tracking things down, which he needed to be like, okay, I don't believe in demons, so I'm going to look for the logical reason of this, which Sammy then should have tried to misdirect him, because if Aaron is being logical about this, then Aaron is going to get to the bottom of it. But also, Aaron is a big dum-dum, which is shown throughout the entire thing. Aaron's constant condemnation also doesn't come across as him being genuinely interested in whatever justice, but that he thinks he's better than everyone and has more morals than everyone around him and would prefer to force himself on others. It just ended up making him feel like a finger wagmaster to the readers. The random romance that it showed at times also didn't do anything. They could have had Sarah, even just like little flirty things with Sarah, but it felt like it was just forced in there. Not that she was just vibing with him because he was actually being nice to her. It felt so ridiculous. The stakes. I think that one of the most annoying things about this is that the characters and it didn't believe in the stakes. Like, fine, whatever. Kirigi and Sammy could ignore the stakes because they were the ones pulling the strings. They probably still should have believed in the stakes just to sell their plot so they didn't look obviously fake. Though there is some actual danger going on because people do die. There is a storm. There is the risk of pirates. There is the risk of mutiny because every member of that crew is a criminal who is a liability. So there was still stakes that if things didn't work out exactly as they planned, and if they were discovered and doing their bidding when they were on that ship, then they would have been executed and there was no escape for them. But never were any of the people on this actually worried about the uncontrollable elements or about the demon. You never saw that if there is a demon or there is a murder afoot tension. It was always so chill. Meanwhile, you have many people on this ship that should have been fearing all the time. Governor Uncle has guards with him when they're on the ship, hears about the curse and doesn't turn back, despite also knowing the origin of the curse or considering he has a past with the origin. But if he's also like, look, I'm the one that faked that curse, this thing is fucking fake. There is a killer on this ship. He should have told Aaron, yeah, it's not a demon. It is a person. Don't be confused. People use demons to control other people, to scare other people. I should know I did it. Not freaking saying something about demons existing when he was talking to Aaron with that fake garbo, which was just meant to be a red herring on the reader. Don't think I didn't see it. Character responses to the stakes are the things that give them weight, and no one in this has any sense of urgency. Not Errant, not Sarah, not Leah, not Governor Uncle, not Krishi, not Sammy, not the captain. The entire time, Sammy is just like legs kicked up. Everything is totally under control. Like, there is not a single second where Sammy feels like he is going to die, where he is not going to make it to Amsterdam, where he is going to be figured out, where Krishi is going to be figured out. Like, none of them worry. Agency. Characters lacked it. All of the characters lacked it. Despite wanting to solve the murder for Sammy and Sarah wanting to keep her daughter safe and get away from her abusive husband and make sure that her daughter didn't get into the same situation that she was in, of an arranged marriage with an abusive asshole that cheats and doesn't care and, her daughter gets to love for love and gets to be the smart girl that she is. None of them are doing anything towards that goal. And she doesn't even keep her mouth shut when she's worried about getting beat. She doesn't show any signs that she has been physically damaged to the point of being unable to walk because she disagreed with her husband. There is no fear in talking to her husband, despite knowing what her husband is like. So they don't have any agency. They don't respond to their surroundings or what is happening in their surroundings. And Errant was pathetic and didn't even want to solve the mystery. He just wanted to have Sammy do it. So he would just give Sammy the information so Sammy could tell him what to do, because he is such a little pea brain. He is so uninteresting as a main character because he has zero drive, not even to do this for Sammy's sake, not even to do this for Sarah's sake, for Leah's sake, for the sake of any of the women and children on the board. He's not like, I need to solve this for their sake. He's just like, pity me, I'm too dumb. Pacing. The pacing of this is whack. It is so slow. I was like, when is it going to end? I was so excited to read this book, and I got started and I'm like, oh my gosh, when is it going to start? The first couple of chapters where we had the leper and the boarding on the ship, I was like, okay, cool. And then I was like, nothing is happening. What the frick? What the frick? And the first 300 pages are 3 days. And then you do a random 3-week time skip. So it feels like forever. And there are chapters where it's just nothing is happening. The plot moving forward was constantly convenient information being found without trying to have the character they just thought of it. And it was like, oh, I've made this connection. We know what to do now. Because of that, it felt like the story was about a boat trip and thinking. This is the reason why I stopped reading that other book that had the alien and the detective on the front, because it was just setting. For the most part, stuff is not very well described. It gets better described at some points near the end, but the rooms aren't very well described. The setting is not really described. There's no atmosphere here, and you can make a ship very claustrophobic, very atmospheric, very scary, and it is not. It doesn't bother with this. Exposition dumping. I don't know why this happened, but it happened a lot in this book, and I'm going to try to give it some grace that maybe it was because it was behind this idea of finding where the devil was inside of everybody that motivated everybody, and also it felt like a convenience that it wanted to use exposition dumping as a way to show a passage of time. And so then you would just have random things be said all the time to express, I don't know, just to waste pages. The writing. Evelyn Hardcastle had some stylistic choices that weren't exactly my favorite, because this author does have a tendency to overly describe how people are acting, and also some really weird metaphors and similes, but I can mostly ignore them because the story is interesting. This had some of the most bizarre descriptions throughout it, though, just quote, like all swords, it was great for killing and terrible for shaving, quote, wondered Leah with a professional curiosity. Also, choices were made, quote, Dorothea was having to wash everything in seawater, making the clothes stiff and itchy. Still, it was better than the sailors. They washed their clothes infrequently, and when they did, it was with their own urine. Also very heavy-handed in, this person is good, this person is bad, even with Sammy, who was only killing the bad people, which he said himself as his excuse when Errant said that it was not okay that he did what he did. And then you write this married woman who was apparently so coy and so ignored that, quote, something about his presence near her bed caused her to turn slightly red, despite the circumstances. Girl, you were at least 30. You are over 30, you are married. You may not like your husband, but I do not believe for a second that you are so coy that you don't recognize that you are looking at this man. You are alone in a bedroom, near a bed, with him, and you're thinking of how sexy he is because you are attracted to him. Something about his presence. Just stop it with this coyness. Theme. The theme of the man can be the devil without the devil feels lost, and there is not enough character focus or character exploration to really get into this, despite the depth and the the complexity of that theme. It just feels like a Reuben Goldberg death trap in the most annoying way. The folly. What was the point of it? Because the device is just there to posture about how amazing women are and how oppressed they are, that even at the young age of whatever Leah is, she can't just be smart because it'll intimidate the men. The book felt like it was constantly winking at the reader that, yo, I'm one of the good guys. Maybe that's just me. I feel like it's one of those things I need other people to read this to like get their impression of the way that this is, because it just felt so condescending to me and so unfocused on just the characters doing the character thing. Because you also had it all the time when it was doing this, it's the rich that are evil, eat the rich, power is mean and nasty. Now, I could just be projecting here. I could be reading too much into this, and I don't want to assume the author's perspective because I didn't see any of this in Evelyn Hardcastle. I just don't know what happened with this book to give it this, to turn it into this, the ending. I can't express in words just how disappointed I am that the ending of this book was just sitting down to dinner with the culprits, who over food just explained away every little thing in unnecessary murder quest of one person that got an entire crew, that got half a crew murdered, and they just shrug it off and then decide to become the vigilantes of Europe. Instead of poisoning the guy or pushing him off the boat during the storm or stabbing him during the mutiny, you go through these hoops and leave others dead, shrug your shoulders at it, have it all paid for magically by the hotness of your sister, and then go on to become the 1600s Avengers. The 1600s Batman and Friends. I don't know if I really just read this. It's confusing to me, to say the least. With that said, that was The Devil in the Dark Water by Stuart Turton. What are your thoughts? Have you read this book? Will you read this book? What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments down below. We got another Stuart Turton book to read, which is called The Last Murder at the End of the World. Hopefully we have better luck with that one. With that said, have a great weekend and don't die.
Was that Wayland Cross in the trunk? Do you know, or is that something that's still being figured out?
The person in the trunk was not Wayland Cross. Is he in trouble? We don't know who did it, but as the owner of the car, the longer he's missing, the worse it looks for him.
Cross isn't a killer. For the last couple of years, the average number of murders in Baltimore has been over 300, and it's been going up. Mind you, that's only whatever the badges count as official murder, and believe me, there are people that don't count when they die. Wayland? If you're down here, tell me. I'm not talking to the badges, I've been looking for you. They found a body in your trunk. Why? Did you do that? To the left, plain black letters read along the wall. You walked in the corridor. Once that ends, you chose the dark is on the right. My vision goes blurry. Flickers black and black and black for longer intervals until I can't see anything at all. I'm not screaming anymore, but my voice echoes back to me. Where the hell am I? You're dead, Josephine. Even smart people do stupid shit sometimes, right?